Mary Hoffine is here to assist today, and she worked on these projects as well. So
wonderful.
All right, I'll give you confirmation as soon as we're live on YouTube, and then I'll let you start the meeting, Emily.
Perfect. Thank you. It says from my end that it's streaming live.
Yep, we're streaming live, so you can start the meeting.
Okay.
I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Perfect. Good evening. Good afternoon, everyone. It's 4:02, so we'll call this meeting to order. I see Josie, Makeda, OB, Steve, and myself. So Garish and Rick. 3, 4, 5. So we're missing 2. But that's okay. We'll kick off with a quorum and we'll see if they can join us. So I'm going to start by just saying my internet has been really great recently until it's not. So OB, if I freeze in some stoic pose, as thoughtful as I am, assume that I'm down and pick up where I left off. I tend to go out for about a minute maximum. So I'll just apologize ahead of time. Okay, so right now we'll have our first Citizens to be Heard session. We will try to have another one again as close to 5 as possible. If you are here to speak for one of our public hearings, please keep your comments on hold until we open up the public hearing for that item. So if you are here to make a comment about something that is not a public hearing, whether or not it's on our agenda, you're more than welcome to come off of mute and state your name and we'll give you a chance to speak. But if you are here for a public hearing, please hold your comments until the public hearings, which will happen after 5 o'clock. We are going to do our best to keep those as close to 5 o'clock as possible. So bear with us. So is there anyone here who'd like to make a public comment on an issue that is not a public hearing on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move forward and we will have another Citizens to be Heard session just after 5. Is there any ex parte communications or disclosures to be made by members of the Planning Commission? Steve?
Forgot about that mute button. Yes, so for me with the Willow Springs overnight accommodation, my wife is the architect on that project, or she was. I don't know if she still is, but yeah. Does that mean that since that's a public hearing, oh, it is an action item actually. Okay, so I believe need to recuse myself fully from that item.
Willow Springs is it's a public hearing, but if you are not personally an agent to any of the parties or a party that's in that public hearing or have like a disclosure of a vested interest in the outcome of that, I don't like, because for example, if somebody else's employer was doing something, I'm not totally sure. Abby, would you do me a favor while we're in the first part of this and just contact Chris or Christina and see how we handle that?
Yeah, and my apologies on not bringing that up earlier. I just reread the bylaws because I knew that we might have shifted them or altered them. So anyways, just being transparent. My wife has made money off of that as an architect for them. So I don't know if she's continuing forward. I don't know. Anyways, there it is. Tell me what to do.
Hey, Abby, both Chris and Christina are in another meeting, but you might be able to text them and they'd get back to you.
I'll send them an email, but if I don't get confirmation back from them, I think that you should recuse yourself from that vote. But if they say otherwise between now and then, I will let you know. Thank you, Steve.
Great. Thanks, Steve. We definitely, if they think it's okay, we want to give you the chance to speak and be a participant. So we'll clarify that. Okay, awesome. Anyone else have any other disclosures to make?
So it's Rick. So the other 2 things we're going to consider today, my employer, who I speak for, has property in the area, almost somewhat adjacent to the proposed trailer park, but I don't know if that matters or not. it didn't sound like it did, so.
It's good to make that disclosure, but that wouldn't require you to have to recuse from discussion or voting.
Okay,
Just the location wouldn't be, yeah, but thank you. Awesome. Anyone else? Okay. Ethics, I love it. Let's move forward. Approval of meeting minutes. So meeting minutes for March 22nd. Does anybody have any changes to make or any issues with the minutes as recorded? Otherwise, or as drafted? Otherwise, I'll accept a motion.
I would move that we approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion on the table by OB, seconded by Steve. Any discussion? Okay, we'll call the vote. All in favor of approving the minutes, raise your hand or say aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we are missing Garish. So 6 in favor, unanimous, and Garish absent. Moving on to our second action item, JJ's Mercantile at Sorrel River Ranch sign approval.
All right, thanks. I can give a short presentation on this one. So the reason typically sign permits are approved within this office, but the reason that this sign permit has come to Planning Commission for final approval is because of a stipulation in the land use code for Dude Ranch or Destination Resort. I included that section in the packet, but it just states that the signage, as you know, shall be determined by the Planning Commission. So just to make sure everything is fully checked off, I wanted to bring that before, but it is pretty much just a administrative approval. JJ's Mercantile at Sorrel River Ranch. It is, some of you who were on the Planning Commission for a while can remember they have opened a new building that is commercial, kind of a little general store on the ground floor, and then employee housing above. They last summer put a pretty large JJ's Mercantile sign on the building without having gotten approved for a sign permit first. And then when this office was alerted to that issue, contacted Sorrel and has been in the process with them ever since then of working out a situation that's going to make their sign compliant. And what was determined is that because only the lettering on a signage actually counts towards the square footage, if they paint the background of the signage to match close to the building and then have the lettering in a contrasting color, based on the stipulations for signage in general, for signage for a Dude Ranch and Destination Resort, and for the signage stipulations that are on the plat for Sorrel, what they have, what the sign that's in your packet meets all those criteria. It meets all those criteria. If anyone has questions, let me know and hopefully I can answer those for you. Otherwise, I think we should be ready for a vote pretty quick. So
I had a question, Abby, and it's, but I think you maybe answered it. It's sort of legislative because it says they need the approval, our approval on signs in this particular case. Is that roughly right?
that's roughly right. Although I discussed it and it was unclear how much, if they're meeting all the required stipulations from the places I just listed. It's unclear. I think this is more coming before the Planning Commission for final approval because it needs to meet all those stipulations versus having it be a legislative decision where the Planning Commission could deny or have them do something else instead.
Whoops. The only other comment I'd make is I saw the sign probably before it got kind of officially approved in terms of background and what we count for size, and it's not obtrusive in my eye at all. So for 2 cents worth.
Okay.
So this is not a public hearing. That said, is there anybody from the applicants representing the applicant at the meeting who'd like to make any comments or just provide any clarification? I didn't know if anybody, it's not required. I just didn't know if anybody was here to speak.
Thank you for asking. I have been in contact with the facilities management person at Sorrel, who's the person that ultimately is in charge of this. And I asked him if he had any additional things he wanted to add at this meeting, and he didn't have anything. And I did alert him to the meeting. So I think that everything he wanted to explain is in there.
Great. So does anybody have any comments or any additional questions for staff? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion for this action item.
I'll make a motion to approve JJ's Mercantile at Sorrel River Ranch sign.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by Steve, seconded by Josie. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor of the motion as stated by Steve, raise your hand or say aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Unanimously approving with Garish absent.
Okay,
All right,
thanks everyone.
thank you. Moving on to the, is it Bellio?
Yes,
Yes, wonderful.
I believe so. Right? Is it Bellio? Bellio, okay.
Bellio, okay.
The Bellio replat. And so basically what this is proposing, these are all lots in the Puesta del Sol subdivision. And Mary, please jump in if you have anything to add, but it is 2 property owners, and they purchased a lot that adjoins both of their existing lots. And what they're doing is taking that 3rd lot, and each of the older lots are absorbing that in. So it's turning 3 lots into 2 lots. So pretty straightforward, but let me know if there's any questions or anything else, Mary.
And the reason
Yeah.
it goes this direction is because state law requires that anytime you amend a subdivision, you either have to have everybody in the subdivision sign it, or you do a public hearing. And that's why this process is going this direction. And there'll be a public hearing at the county council for approval.
Okay, and is there anyone from this applicant here to speak?
Doesn't look like.
Okay. If there's any question for staff or clarification from the commission, you're welcome to bring it up. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to send a positive recommendation to the county to approve the replat of amended lots 3 in phase 4, lots 2 in phase 3, and the vacation of the lot 17 phase 2 in the Puesta del Sol PUD subdivision.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by OB, seconded by Maketa. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, raise your hand or say aye. 6 unanimous in favor with 1 absent. Lovely. That is the end of our action items, our administrative items today. Next, we have the County Commission action items report, followed by the County Commission update.
Okay, so first of all, I want to apologize. I think I'm slowly learning my job and what I'm needing. So I want to apologize. I wasn't being flippant in the past, just like, okay, this is what I need to do. My goal is to have this down pat by the time my term is up. That's my goal. So, anyway. Okay, so this is the commission update. So adopting ordinance amending number 588 in land use code section 6.5.3, 6.5.4, and 6.5.5D, and definitions of 10.2. Christina discussed the land use code with regard to illuminating signs and need for our land use code to expressly disallow lighted signs, and that passed 7-0. I think that this pertains to the Planning Commission. Renee discussed the need to hire a new planning and zoning director and some of the limitations with the current pay scale. Chris Baird discussed the need to adapt and offer flexibility to hire staff under a new pay scale. And that motion passed 7-0. And so what it was is to increase the negotiation power with grade 18 for the planning and zoning director. As you know, we had a public hearing to receive comment on amendments to land use code sections 3.1, 3.2.3, 3.4.9, and 10.2 definitions. Chrissy discussed and clarified the changes to the land use code, noting the provisions to regulating ATV businesses and the distinctions between some types of businesses. New ATV sales would be required to sell electric vehicles. Christina discussed the changes to the clustering development definition and overnight accommodations. She discussed the noticing requirements and Grand County adherence to those requirements. During that, and this is just a personal note on that discussion or public comment, that went on for quite a long time. I don't know, I want to say an hour feasibly. And it was kind of split down the middle. I mean, Emily, you were on, it was kind of split down the middle. We definitely received comments on both sides, unlike, and I'll state the comments that we're receiving through email, which are all, very in line to trying to put some regulations on ATVs. So that was pretty interesting. And also, that being said, I just got out of a meeting there. They were holding a meeting today, and that's where Chris and Christina are with ATV business owners or UTV business owners, trying to discuss assistance in coming up, with some codes that will assist in noise. And so I had to leave early. And then we have 2 more meetings on Thursday, a workshop, some workshops pertaining to this. So it's not quite as cut and dried as we think. When I was in this current meeting, there was some really good feedback from the owners of these businesses. It started a little contentious, but I think in the end, they understood that, hey, we're here, we need your help. What would you recommend? So that was great. Let's see, I don't want to miss anything. As far as the repealing Title V and the Grand County general ordinances and relating to Ordinance 629 and adopting a new Title V, that was postponed. And then you also wanted me to discuss the bypass. Kevin Walker discussed the bypass in the original plan, noting Moab City passed as something similar in the last meeting. This would indicate to UDOT that Grand County does not want the bypass in any future plans. It was motioned by Kevin to approve that resolution, stating Grand County's opposition to USU 191 bypass alignments and requesting that UDOT remove that project from UDOT 2021 Southeastern Utah Regional Transportation Plan project list. And that passed 6-1 with Evan opposing that. And that's all I have. So it was an interesting meeting. Like I said, it wasn't cut and dried as far as, we had a lot of for and against, split right about down the middle. Did you want to add anything to that, Emily? Because you were on that.
It was very interesting hearing from different sides of that issue. I do think one thing that stood out to me was many of the suggestions being made by people who would not like to see this type of regulation go into place in Grand County. Many of them were suggesting changes that we as a community have asked of the state legislature, and the state legislature has not given us the power to use, such as designated routes. And actually, a number of people said, I don't see why you just have designated routes through your community. And a number of people also commented on nighttime hours or sort of quiet hours or quiet hours in specific areas. Which I thought was equal parts frustrating and also enlightening. And I hope that if there are members of the state legislature or other local bodies paying attention to this conversation happening in our community, that they're seeing that this is not something that Grand County is requesting because of local government overreach or anything to that end, but actually trying to find an outcome that is much more holistic and more community centered, and that this this fallback is really the option that the state has given us as the last remaining tool in our toolbox. And I hope that this can lead to some more productive conversations with the state legislature. So that was one thing that was really interesting to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Highly recommend going back and watching the recording. It's a good conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Trisha. I think you're doing a fabulous job, by the way. So
Thank you.
And let's see here. Any updates from staff just related to county commission items beyond what was just provided?
No, thank you, Trisha. I think you gave a great update and summary, and that really is the intention of having the commission update is following where projects go once they leave planning commission and bringing up things that come to county council that are just generally of interest to planning commission. So I think you did a great job covering those topics.
I want to bring up one more thing that it's really interesting, and I've had now 2 meetings in the last 2 weeks, just random meetings. So I ran into Mark Stilson, right, who has a Department of Natural Resources water rights, and he said, you know, the city of Moab, the Grand County and San Juan County are really going to have to start seriously looking at water. And we know that that's on the table. And he mentioned, you know, the planning commission and using the land use code to work on water conservation. So I'm just throwing this out. And then Steve Getz also brought that. We went on a walk and he brought that up. And so I'm just throwing that out. I know that, you know, that everybody's discussing water and the conservation of water. But I think it's something that, you know, the planning commission can seriously start to hopefully delve into in the near future.
Wonderful. Okay, so the building permit review is included in our packet. Abby, any comments to make about that in general?
I should say, I realize the 4 units in Arroyo Crossing that are listed on there haven't received final approval. They were, I mistakenly put building permits that had been applied for and that we were reviewing and not ones that are finally approved. So we should see that happen shortly, but I just wanted to make that note. And are there any other questions about that recent building permit list? Okay.
All right. So we had anticipated the first half of this taking slightly longer, which is why we had moved the discussion about one, which is fine. I'm always glad when things go faster than planned. But this is why we'd moved the discussion of the Spanish Valley survey to the bottom of the agenda. We have decided, especially just because there's so many public hearings, and this was raised by one of the members of the commission last meeting, to come back to having public hearings after 5 p.m. whenever possible. So I would recommend that we move the conversation of the survey back up towards the top, led by our vice chair, but we do need a motion to amend our agenda. So if somebody wants to make an motion and second it, we can vote and then we can have that conversation.
I'll make a motion to amend our agenda by bringing the Spanish Valley survey forward in time to time travel till now.
Okay, motion to time travel the survey. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor of changing our agenda to move the discussion to after our action items, raise your hand or say aye. Great, wonderful. Unanimous support for that controversial choice. Obi, I know I sort of sprung this on you, but give you a moment to pull that up. And maybe you could just talk through any suggestions you've heard in the short term, any changes or alterations you've made, and then we can just pick up the conversation where we left off.
This is great. You just reminded me I can share screen. Let's see. Host disabled the screen sharing. So I think I need an okay from Abby.
Sorry, just a sec, Bob. Let me give you that.
That's just great. Okay, I'm going to try it now and see if it's very sad, isn't it? Oh, here we go. And of course I have 40 documents up. And here's what I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to get some of these documents down, I guess, so that I can do this. So
I can
here we
also,
go.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can share my screen if you prefer, but
Let me see if I can just do this and see if I get down this far, whether it's going to make it so I can see. How do I have? There it is, I think right there. Yep, got it.
yep, that's working.
Okay. Let me, yeah, I'm going to kind of quickly introduce some of the things I did, and then we're going to go right to the heart of this. I got some comments by Steve and Makeda, and actually, though some places it doesn't look like I incorporated them, I tried to. So I'm only going to say question number 3 that's here has now been changed into one of these lists like we had in the 313-191 type survey. And it's very, very helpful on something like Mark was talking about last time. I think putting bed and breakfast in what types of uses would you like to see makes it so it really, it's very hard to write an unbiased question. So it's stuck in here. It's also stuck in here with rental condos. And people should look at these 2 lists, I guess it's question 3 and question 4 at some point to say, oh, gee, why didn't O'Brien include such and such? Because although these can serve as tickler questions, I think that's an Emily word, they won't be as impressive in the amount of people who check that they'd like to see them, right? So if there are things you think I should have in these lists, I do think about doing that. One way of doing that is to go to the uses, let's say, the actual permitted uses along Highway 191, for instance, in highway commercial, et cetera, to think of some of those. I'm going to just move on. I highlighted in yellow things that I think we could drop. This is terrible to admit, but Emily said, why is this question doing in here this, I think it was this one, the high density overlay, a sunset. And there's a piece of me that thinks she was probably, might have been correct in that, it's nice to find out what people think about the high density housing overlay. But is this the place that we do that part of the survey? So right now, my thinking is we might cancel it, but we aren't talking about this section right now. And therefore, down on question 10, I recommend that we drop the B&B question. We've got a place where we're asking, do people think that's a good idea to have some B&Bs now earlier in that list? Here we are. On the new questions, I should say a couple of things. I changed some questions because of comments Makeda asked. I actually changed a later question or two because of what Steve had asked. And part of this is, what kind of bias do we have when, are you in favor of growth and development? Because that doesn't sound real good, because, growth and development seem to have some negative connotations also. So there's a couple of places where I've tried to put in, and I'll just mention this quickly down here. How important do you think new commercial businesses, this is 14, stores, movie theaters, offices in Spanish Valley, which I think sounds less biased than growth and development. It was an attempt at doing that. So I'm going to move now back up. This is terrible. Let's see, I can do it this way. And I guess we're on question number 11, and later on questions that we think might be eliminated. And if we eliminated all the questions, I suggest we get down to 15, which isn't Emily's 10, but it's getting there. So I'm open to, I'll just read this question. How important is the preservation of Spanish Valley's agriculture, ranch, land use? Very important, somewhat important, slightly important, not very important, not important at all. Any comments?
So OB, first of all, strong opinions weekly held is my talent. So I'm perfectly comfortable with being wrong. But I think these questions are great. And generally speaking, it's the open text questions that can become, we don't want people selecting out of answering questions or finishing the survey because it takes so much time. The way that these are framed are great. And I think these are great questions to be asking as well to get a 360-degree view.
Great. I'm going to move down to 12. Should more high, and this is in part, and Steve may want to step in here because later I recommend some high density questions be taken out. I'm not sure if I want to get into whether the high density housing overlay is something folks are interested in. And yet this question kind of gets at it because of course it's talking about, should you have the housing for residents, people who work and people who can be affordable. So keep an eye on this, Steve. Should high density housing be permitted in Spanish Valley? Yes, if the developer wants it. Carte blanche, I guess. Yes, but only if some housing is for locals only. Yes, but only if some housing is affordable for locals only. Yes, but only if all the housing is for locals only. Yes, but only if the housing is affordable for locals only. Not appropriate. Well, no, it is not appropriate for Spanish Valley. So this is an attempt to see if this question might fulfill that need.
Yes, you're right, Obi. I do have some comments on this. So I look at this question and I think how I would probably answer it, and probably a lot of residents as well, they would probably say, yes, if it's affordable and for locals. I think that's kind of what a lot of us want. I might be projecting, I'll admit that. But that seems to be what I hear time and time again. And so I think we'll get that answer here, but I don't know if that really tells us anything, because if it is going to be affordable, then, if it's high density housing, there's really it's not going to do anything, because the only entities that are going to build those units, and this could change, but I don't think it will, it's going to be public sector. It's going to be HASU through, with that USDA grant, and also community rebuilds. And they, I think, are inundated with Arroyo crossings. I mean, there's hundreds of units going in over there. And so if we say, yes, we want, an affordable and for locals only, there's going to be no private developer that's going to do anything with that. I mean, you might get a couple scattered units. We've seen that already with this with the high density housing overlay come in, but I don't think it's going to do much for us. And so I wonder if there's a way we could tweak that and have check all that apply. And, maybe that way we get a little bit more insight. Because my only other solution is to add 2 or 3 questions and have it. I think they would be really quick questions to answer, but I know we're trying to slim this thing down. So I guess the problem statement I see with this is I don't think it's going to tell us anything. So maybe there are some other solutions out there.
I mean, I'll add some.
Yep.
I would add that based on things that I've heard from Spanish Valley residents, it seems like what we would mostly get out of this question is the difference between yes and no, and not necessarily much insight from the various degrees of yes, because I think that my understanding is that people in Spanish Valley are either, for high density, affordable and local housing, or they don't want high density housing in Spanish Valley. And so I wonder if that's what we're trying to gain from this question, or if we are trying to get more nuanced direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the HDHO, there's only a few additional seats left to that party. So I think at this point, understanding the balance of housing development, commercial development, or general business development, and then just range and grazing agricultural is valuable. We sort of capture that up above. I find this question is likely to catch sort of the tides of the time and not actually tell us much of anything. So I think we're fine striking it or thinking about reframing it more around, are there areas you'd like to see housing? Are you more interested in seeing higher density housing such as multifamily housing or small lot residential as opposed to large lot residential? There might be ways that we can get to some useful outcomes of this without sort of throwing it out with the bathwater. I think I put like 8 idioms into that statement, by the way, but hopefully it translates.
Well, and maybe asking a more open-ended question about density, period, like how either how important it is to keep, you know, low density in Spanish Valley, or maybe a list of like what would be appropriate reasons for higher density in Spanish Valley. And, you know, housing could be one of, like, there could be various subsections of that question.
The sort of researcher in me would be curious to get a sense for, well, no, never mind. I guess it's where my head was going is, would it be interesting to know if this person taking the survey tended to be more in favor of higher density development, and would that help us gauge and see differences in their responses? But I don't think that's particularly useful or relevant to this.
I will, I'll say 2 things. Why doesn't anyone who thinks they can reframe this question to be about high density housing or list? I'm going to also do my own attempt to reframe it. You know, I kind of like the idea of a list of why you might want to approve higher density housing. But I would certainly accept anyone's question that thinks that we can get better at this issue. Otherwise, maybe we do need to drop it. So feel free to send me a question, because I think I have maybe 2 different things that Josie suggested, and one from Steve, and maybe a different one from Emily. So we probably, unless somebody wants to reformulate it right now, why don't we leave it in abeyance?
Let me make a suggestion and just see if there's a thumbs up, thumbs down generally. I do think that multiple choice with an open text option is a really nice format for this sort of survey. Would we be open to, do you, option 1, oppose high density housing, support multifamily, or do you support multifamily residential housing in Spanish Valley? Do you support small lot residential housing in Spanish Valley? Do you support is the wrong word, but I'm trying to get at different types of density, including high density overlays, make it a support multiple. So they could say, I like this, 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 and that, and then give them open text to say, please explain your above decisions, such as why and where you might want to see this type of development. And then I don't support high density housing overlay, or I support it anywhere. As
Emily, maybe something I could add on to this. I was typing
Please,
this out as you were
polish
saying.
away.
Sure. If you think more high density housing should be permitted in Spanish Valley, which kinds would you like to see? Check all that apply. And the first option could be I don't, and then multifamily, affordable, small lot residential, yada, yada, yada.
Much better.
Teamwork.
Josie, what do you think about that? Does that capture your intent, or does that leave something on the table that you think would be valuable to capture as well?
No, I think that's good. I mean, I'm trying to think of any other examples of a reason that there would be an increase in density, but I think that captures it.
Steve, could you do that one more time? Your last suggestion.
If you think more high density housing or higher density housing should be permitted in Spanish Valley, which kinds would you like to see? Check all that apply. I don't.
Start that list for me.
I don't think
Yeah.
more high density housing should, yeah. Multifamily,
Mhm.
affordable housing, small lot residential for locals only, maybe. I'm kind of spitballing now.
Good. That gets me started.
Great.
Shall we move on to 13? Oh. So the comment I think I got from Makeda was, isn't this better decided by a traffic study? It is very open-ended, and I thought I agreed with her, at least at the time when I had my yellow pen out on 13. This says, does Spanish Valley need upgraded roads, intersections? If so, where? Is the yellow pen correct?
What's the intent behind this question? I mean, it might be obvious, but like, what are we trying to get out of it? Is it like dangerous intersections, run down intersections?
I mean, I think that probably was, where do people think there's problematic intersections? But again, it's one of these open-ended questions, and maybe folks would kind of sort of vote for, let's say, a stoplight somewhere on a major intersection on 191 or on Spanish Valley Drive. But I think I agree with Makeda on this, that it's probably really up to traffic studies and public pressure that you'll probably get when you start getting dangerous intersections.
So we had a suggestion written into us maybe a year and a half ago, and I think it was presented to the county council at the time as well, around recommended nodes for development, basically from the south border of town all the way to the county line and going into San Juan County. There's some interesting thoughts there around node-based development. And as we look at this as the predecessor to, or the precursor to, a actual planning exercise for this area, I do think it's useful to know, like I feel strongly that there are areas in the county that are conducive to more dense commercial areas, or I should say sort of general business or retail areas at least, maybe some mixed use, to serve residents in the Southern County, to make sure that we aren't losing potential tax revenues to San Juan County, and to concentrate density of any sort where it makes the most sense versus allowing it to sort of be ad hoc or completely lacking. Two of those nodes that immediately strike me as obvious given their existing development is the Mill Creek 191 area across in the vicinity of the university, which is likely to be eventually all annexed into the city, but isn't all yet. And the Spanish Trail 191 intersection, where there is a restaurant, a gas station, and other an RV park, or I should say, I think it's a storage unit area. I would be very curious to understand if people do support node-based development, what kind of uses they would be willing to see there, and if they have a sense for which nodes come up to them, because if there's consensus or at least, a trend towards wanting to see that and already kind of understanding where those places might be, I think that would be a really influential thing for us to be able to build into our small area plan. Bob, I don't know how to frame that as a question offhand. But I, as opposed to just kind of, do we need upgraded roads and intersections? I would be more curious of, would you be in support of concentrated development around the following nodes? And if so, which uses might you support there? I'm breaking my own rule about the number of questions, but I do think that would be valuable.
Well, and question 5 starts to get at that. Question 5 is, if you support seeing some new commercial nodes or expanding commercial nodes in Spanish Valley, where would you like to see such businesses? So
yeah,
I don't know if that covers it. And because it seems like two different approaches towards, I'm sorry, my laundry is so loud right now. The idea of commercial nodes and then the idea of upgrading roads or intersections, because sometimes development of an intersection or node could make it safer and like more upgraded just by the nature of the development. So I don't know if we're trying to get that nuanced or that complex, but
I feel like it also ties into the next question, number 14, that's also gauging interest in new commercial business. So those might be tied together somehow anyways also.
So OB, going back to question 5, it might be nice to have some preceded options there, maybe. I don't know how familiar people might be with the idea of nodes.
Yeah.
That's a guess, with an open-ended option. And I do think once we have the sort of questions themselves detailed, we might want to look at organization to cluster questions together. Jizzy, that was you're absolutely right. I was replicating what we had already done.
Good. I'm keeping my to-do list here and going back on up. So we're going to eliminate question 13, but we're going to try to upgrade question 5 with a little bit of a list and an open-ended piece to it if possible. Whoops. 14. A nice liquored question. And let me just see here. Yes,
Do you
it
think
was.
important or need? Sorry, I'm looking at 14. Like, how much do you think we need this?
Say that again.
Do you think we need more commercial development versus how important is it to you?
Okay.
Slightly
What
different.
I was. Got it.
well, and question 14 and 18 are very similar, but something that is interesting is one just says new commercial businesses and one specifies retail businesses. And that is, sometimes I feel like it's a loaded question to ask people about commercial businesses in a generalized way, because that could be so many different things that have very different uses. Some are more car oriented, some are more pedestrian oriented, things of that nature, but also just so much else. So I would have an interest in taking those two questions, which are kind of redundant, and I don't know, like parsing out types of commercial development. I don't know if that makes sense, and what those categories might look like.
Interesting. So certainly, I'm looking through because of course I need to see these questions. But you're also not just suggesting, of course, that we swap these questions, that is, get rid of 14 and take 18, which at least gets rid of commercial businesses, but it's probably the reason I dropped 18, but maybe somehow a list. Any suggestions on how to Because obviously, one can always look at this and say, it's a bit of a double-barreled question, because you might like movie theaters, but you hate offices or something. Although it's,
And even going back to
anybody-
question 4, which talks about what types of uses in general would you like to see? I mean,
yes.
that might be more helpful than how important it is. I'm not sure.
So,
Exactly.
so that would be making sure these things, stores, movie theaters, offices are kind of listed in that list of things that you'd like to see.
That helps
I just
us
have a
when
question.
reviewing, oh, just one thought on that is that helps us when reviewing the use table and actually actioning on this survey. So it would be useful to know those broken out.
Yes.
Sorry, Steve, thank you.
Oh, no, no worries.
Yeah, and that was my thought for question 4, is to just look at the land use table and do a very objective list. Sorry, Steve, go on.
That's all right. So this question, I'm going back a little bit. This might be a little bit elementary here. In talking about what types of commercial development, are we talking ultimately with this changing and altering the existing zoning in these locations?
So
Is that
when we-
the end game?
It's a planning exercise. So for example, when we did our planning around the 191-313 area, we didn't change any underlying zones. What we did say is, if there are any zone changes, these are the zones that we think do belong in this area, and these are the uses within the zone table for that specific zone. So the county commission could decide to, and we actually have a public hearing later today looking at a zone that's not explicitly stated in the small area plan. The county commission may say, this is a use that we want to see in this area, and the planning itself is sort of, neither here nor there because we think it conforms to a larger vision. So it's not actually affecting it, but it is setting in place some recommended standards based off of planning exercise for future commissions, planning commissions, and county commissions to reference. And ideally,
Gotcha.
it represents a strong enough recommendation and a holistic enough vision of the community intent that it acts as a forcing function, even if it's not a requirement function.
Gotcha. So we're not being like proactive with this stuff. It's basically, sorry, that's maybe the wrong way to phrase that. We're essentially creating handrails to operate within for things that would not normally comply with a zone for the future.
Even our underlying zones, like our overnight accommodation overlays are a good example where we have an existing map in the land use code, but a landowner can petition to have that overlay applied to their property, at which point it would change from what is currently in the land use code. And so if we wanted to, we could say even, and this is all, projecting out to the actual planning process, we could say this is the areas where we do think we should see general business development versus highway commercial versus, small lot residential. And there are specific cases, I think it might be worth exploring actual changes such as the split parcels that we have of highway commercial next to the highway, like we might want to clean that up. But it's not the core purpose of the planning exercise.
I would say, Steve, that the questions that were probably most influential in the, I'm going to call it the 313-191 plan, were these questions where you listed things. What would you like to see in your area? And then there's this big list. And then I would say that the Planning Commission looked at those lists a lot and said, my goodness, people want this, 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 they don't want this, this, and this. And you were allowed to, of course, check all that you wanted. So it is a nice idea to move something like this up where we can see what people kind of vote for when they have an open list.
Well, OB, in that spirit, as we're looking at question 18 here, we kind of start to list in the question itself, stores, movie theaters, offices.
Yes.
What if we just, expanded that list and created that as the options, check all that apply.
Yeah.
Which sort of commercial development do you support in Spanish Valley?
Which is why I think, though, in those questions, everybody, those early ones that we aren't reviewing right now, but which are highly relevant, that people make sure obviously the list can get too long and exhausting, but make sure that the relevant things are there.
Yeah, and we may, if we generate a list, we may be able to find some umbrella groups that, kind of condenses things a little bit.
I think that's what Josie was advocating for too with question 4. So that might be a good way to eliminate a couple of these questions.
Yeah, and not to potentially add questions, but I, if I recall on the 313-191, we did have questions that were both like what types of uses do you want to see more of? And then also lists of what types of uses do you not want to see? And so I wonder if it's more balanced if we do those same kinds of lists so that people can also very strongly say, I don't want any more of this in Spanish Valley or on the 191 corridor.
That's a great suggestion. I want to just quickly time check. It's a little bit before 5. We do have 3 public hearings. First of all, Rick and Makeda, you haven't had as much opportunity to voice your thoughts. So I want to make sure that there's nothing that you have been waiting to say or wanting to say before we turn over. Then I think we might want a motion to table this until after the public hearings. And if we have time and we want to keep going, we can come back to it. And otherwise we can pick it up at our next meeting. Does that sound good? So Rick and Makeda first, I just want to make sure that we're not, steamrolling anything that you wanted to contribute or any thoughts that you think, you want to be in the record.
Personally, I feel comfortable with the discussion we've been having. I'm good.
And my input would be more opening Pandora's box by saying, here's some examples of PUDs, but then you don't want to get into good and bad. Here's some examples of high density, but then you get into good and bad. So I thought I'd say it, and I thought, no, it's stupid, so I don't say it. So anyhow, I'm good.
You think examples would be useful, just so people kind of understand some of these
I don't know
terms?
if there's enough examples to go around that people could be familiar with, and that's my problem there. I don't know if there's any good examples or bad examples, and you wouldn't want to label them. But if there's examples out there that could be examples of like a PUD, you don't label them, but you say, okay, these are some of the things that have happened already. Let people make their own judgments, but I don't know if there's enough of them. So
Do you think there's something to be said for sort of defining the term, even if we don't, I don't think we can use specific projects as examples, to your point, but I do think there's something valuable to just making sure that information is included.
And one other thing I thought of, and it's self-explanatory too. I'm assuming that a 191 corridor is properties that are touching 191, or is it further back?
Well, we haven't fully defined that right now. I think this survey is just a little bit more general. As we get closer to planning, one of the things we'll want to do is say, what is the area that we recommend applying the small area plan to? Which the one we did for the northern corridor evolved a little bit over time. And then I believe the county commission even changed some of the boundaries slightly when it went in front of them.
With that particular one, you didn't have to be, I believe, you didn't have to be up on 191 to be included.
Yeah. And to Steve's point, that's sort of the, this is the collecting of information, of which we'll also have town halls and opportunities for the public to submit comment. And then the planning process is the area at which we say to the county commission, we recommend applying these standards, these guide rails, et cetera, these principles to this particular area. And so if somebody were to then say, I have property within that area, I'd like to do X, the county commission can consult the small area plan to say, is this something we think is in line with this planning exercise? Those are great questions. And I'm sure questions that other people are thinking, both listening in and participating. So,
well, Emily, I'd like to move that we table the survey until later in the meeting, or if time does not permit, table it until our next meeting.
Perfect. I think it's tabled till we pick it up. So,
Okay,
all right. Motion by OB to table the discussion of the Spanish Valley survey. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by OB, second by Steve. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, with 1 absent. Wonderful. So Bob, I think you can stop sharing your screen, and thank you again for leading that conversation.
all I got to do is get to the, yes, it is. It
The
is. a
cat and
wonderful thing.
mouse is
I'm gonna get rid of this thing, and it
Okay.
looks like, stop, okay.
Yeah, all good. Okay. Thank you. Perfect. So it is 5:02. Before we move on to our public hearings, we will hold a second citizens to be heard. Again, this is an opportunity to speak on anything that is not a public hearing. So if you are here to make a comment about an issue, it doesn't matter what the issue is, that is not a part of the 3 public hearings we have upcoming, please pop a note into the chat. So I'll just give that just a moment. Okay. Seeing none, we will move on. So before we go into these public hearings, I just want to set some guide rails in general. The way that we run our public hearings is staff will give their report. The Planning Commission has an opportunity to ask questions of staff. At that point, we'll also invite the applicant to describe their project, make any comments that they think is relevant. The commission can ask questions of the applicant. Let's try and just keep our questions to anything that's just like really critical to understanding this so that we can contextualize citizen comments. Anything that's just more sort of, theoretical or pontificating on the area, we'll save those questions until after people have had a chance to speak. Then we'll open the public hearing. What I'll ask is that you place a comment in the chat first, and then we'll just call you in order. And unless we have a huge number of people wanting to make comments, I don't think we need to gate questions to 2 minutes or 3 minutes, but I will ask that you please, try and keep your comments to 5 minutes or under. And if you start to exceed that, I might interject and just ask you to wrap them up. And if somebody makes a comment that you agree with, you're welcome to say that you agree, but we don't need to restate the comments. Just with 3 public hearings, we would be grateful for that. And then we will invite the applicant to make a final comment, but they will be held to the same time standards as everybody else, however we enforce those, depending on the number of people who want to speak. And then we'll repeat that for each of our public hearings. And then, so commissioners, we'll save our sort of table talk or deeper questions to staff until after we've closed the public hearing and public comment, and then we'll move forward. Okay. So our first public hearing is the Namaste Rock rezone to small lot residential at 13714 North Highway 191. Abby.
All right, so this is a proposal for a rezone, like Emily just said, a parcel that is out in that 191-313 area. This parcel is on one side. This parcel is adjacent to parcels that have other camping development and kind of high density overnight rental development. There's information included in the packet for what the applicant would like to develop on this property should a rezone be granted. And that is helpful for getting some context, but I also want to make it clear that there's no way to tie an applicant to a plan in this type of rezone process. So if a rezone is granted, it is allowing any use that is allowed in the new zone to happen on that parcel. So even though there are specifics to a development in here, the rezone, there's limited amount that you can consider those because the rezone is unlike like the overnight accommodations overlay process where application of the overlay includes approval of a master plan that the applicant has to stick to. There's no such process that would accomplish that in this type of rezone. So just something to keep in mind. I'd also like to say that this parcel, when in the applicant statement, when the applicant purchased the parcel, the county GIS map mistakenly labeled it as a highway commercial zone, even though which is not good, but the county GIS map also does say that these things need to be confirmed, that the map is a resource. So I felt like that was important to include in the explanation of this project. This project has come before the Planning Commission before and was denied the rezone, but that was before the full adoption of the small area plan and the Scenic Resource Protection District that went into play. And a primary reason why this project was not approved at the time, it was cited that in the absence of that plan, the commission was reluctant to approve applications. And so we're bringing this before the Planning Commission again, now that that plan is in place, so that commissioners can make a decision on this project based on that information, as well as the merits of the project. Although the staff recommendation is to deny, I should say there are, I think, potentially some reasons that this could be approved. There is a shortage of housing in Moab, and we all know that is a concern. Rezoning this property to allow housing to be built there could provide housing that would serve some of the entities that exist outside of Moab, such as the airport and the businesses that operate at the airport. Housing could more directly serve Park Service employees. So the Planning Commission may see that there is a need for residential zoning in this area to serve those areas, as well as provide, potential overflow housing for people who live in Moab that isn't as far away as some of the, Monticello, Green River, Thompson, some of the other places where that potential could exist. Also, I wanted to note that the scenic quality of this specific parcel is greatly influenced by the neighboring parcels, which are the Archview RV Park and the Moab Under Canvas. So even though this is in the Scenic Protection District, it is in an area where the viewshed has been impacted by other existing developments, and wouldn't stand out as dramatically as potentially some other parcels that are not, that are isolated. Let's see. And that even though there are no small lot residential parcels currently in that 313-191 area, there's not that many parcels in general. And so the Planning Commission, should they decide to support this rezone, would be, I would not consider that spot zoning, but I would consider that a statement of intention that the Planning Commission would like to see residential development happen in that area, and that is where they think that area should be going. So those are some reasons why this could be approved. Reasons for denial would be that it isn't quite in conformance with the results of the Scenic Protection District. However, if this rezone were approved, anything that was developed on that lot would have to meet those standards. And so the applicant would have to find ways that the actual development on the ground would meet the scenic protection standards. So I think that kind of gives you a rundown. And it looks like, unfortunately, the applicant maybe just dropped off of this call, or never mind, is joining us. So before so Michael, just one moment before I allow the applicant to make a statement, does anyone have questions for staff first? And then we'll allow the applicant to make a statement on their project.
So Abby, just to clarify, on page 29 of our packet, where it looks like the applicant statement suggests that the zoning changed, it's not that the zoning changed, it's that the zoning itself was always range and grazing on the official map, but it was just mislabeled on an online map.
Correct. So
Okay.
The parcel was never a zoned highway commercial, but as you can see in the applicant statement, there was definitely a county resource county map that had it labeled incorrectly.
Any other questions for staff? Okay. Michael, are you able to hear us?
I do have one actually. Historically, because I was at some of the hearings and planning commission, county commission, where this instance came up. Was there previously and sorry, I'm failing on my words here. Was there an effort to change the range and grazing to highway commercial previously? That was maybe denied. That would have been denied, I guess.
The Michael Scarta, the applicant, can confirm that, but I believe that the recent history is that the applicant applied to have the parcel rezoned to resort commercial, which currently exists closer to town, kind of those areas right at the bridge, and had that rezone request denied, and then applied for small lot residential. I don't believe that, we'll have to have Michael ask that after he's made his applicant statement. Is that was the history I can find off the top of my head, but I would like to have that confirmed. Any other questions on this property for staff right now? Okay, if questions come up later, we can answer those.
It looks like the applicant might be trying to get cell service. Michael,
Yeah.
are you able to hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you. I was hoping that I had better cell service. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You might want to turn your video off, but we can hear you if you stay where you are. All right. Testing. Can you hear us now?
Okay. To answer a couple of those questions. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. There's a little bit of a lag. Why don't you go ahead and state your full name into the record and then go ahead and make your statement.
Okay. So Namaste Rock, when we purchased the land, the county map said that it was highway commercial. And so we have since applied for highway commercial, resort commercial, and this time we're applying for small lot residential. Anyway, it turns, when we bought it, it was highway commercial, but the maps was erroneous. It wasn't correct. I checked all the ordinances. We couldn't find a vote that ever made it highway commercial. We were incorrectly getting airage coverage from the parcel to the south of us. And so we don't have highway commercial. We're applying for now, after we've been rejected those other two, is just residential. And anyway, nothing else can be done with this land besides residential. And it's really, really important for Moab that more residential be added. If any of you guys have checked Rentler or Hotpads or Zillow, try and find a place to find a long-term rental. I checked today, I found one. I contacted him and he said that he could not help me. He said that he has multiple people viewing it tonight and that he's going to close it, that it wasn't worth applying for. So anyway, we have this whole small area plan that's here, and there is no residential that's in it. And it's really, really important that residential be fixed. We have thousands of units of short-term accommodations that have gone up that have already been approved, and this is not available. Anyway, please consider it. If not, we fully plan to do what is maybe more appropriate and going ahead and putting in filing for overnight accommodations in this area, but I know what's needed, and long-term housing is needed. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Hey, Michael, I have a couple questions for you. I'd love to get clarified. So the first is there intent to either deed restrict or cap, or, you know, how do we ensure that if you were to get this rezone, that it would go to local residents? Is that something that I know, well, I'll just tell you it's a concern of mine in considering this upzone. So I'd just love to get a sense if it's something that you have thought about.
Yeah, so I was talking to staff about this, and I would love to deed restrict it. They didn't believe that was possible at this point. Anyway, if you have any other ideas, that's okay. Small lot residential is only for 30 nights and additional. And there aren't schools here. And so people that stay here may not be the people that go to your schools, but the plus is that you'll get the property tax, and you'll get people that are contributing to the community at the airport and at the parks. And maybe there will be some people that want to commute to the schools there. But I don't think that just because it's not ideal housing for schools doesn't mean that it's not needed. I talked to Skydive Moab, and they need housing desperately. I mean, not just a little bit. They were begging me to go ahead and put a trailer, and unfortunately that's not legal. I can't go ahead and let them put a trailer there. That doesn't conform to the rules, and so we have all this overnight accommodations and all this. We need support housing, and this would cover that, and I think it would cover it for locals. And yes, we'll deed restrict it. As a planning commission, you guys can find a way to make something, but look, other places you don't go on a hot pad somewhere and find zero rentals anywhere. This is a really, really, really bad problem. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michael. I know that you've been actively involved in the small area planning and staying in close contact with this body as you've considered options. So thank you so much for your involvement. Any other questions for the applicant before we open the public hearing?
Sorry, headphones that are. I have a question on the water, because I know water is an issue in this area. I saw the letter from the Park Service and the data around the well, but I don't totally understand what that means, especially around having 80 units. So I wonder, Michael, if you could explain a little bit more how the water math works for development in this area.
Yeah, of course. We're really proud of our well. In the small area plan, there has been only one water right.
Oh, Michael,
in the
we
past
lost you.
20 years that
Michael, sorry, we lost you.
I'm aware of, that the Park Service did not protest. And that is ours. Went through every step with the Park Service. And sorry about that.
You said there's been
maybe I can call back in.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's only been one water right in the history of the area that the Park Service has written a letter of support. Every other water right they have protested. And our water right is the one that they supported because we went through and we gamma logged it. We went through and we did well monitoring of the other wells in the area. We've done recently, we just did a 90-day pump test for them. And we paid for the bulk of the electricity on that benefited us for nothing because we wanted to be able to tell the long-term impact on the springs um, before there was housing there. And so anyway, no one else in this area has ever done anything to protect the water like we have. Unfortunately, that may come back and limit what we can build. But we've done this in a healthy manner beforehand, rather than everyone else that's gone ahead and built first to get there to get theirs. Anyway, our water, the other wells in the area have not been proven to show that they don't drain from the upper Entrada aquifer. Ours only takes water from the lower Navajo. And we know that because we pumped from the lower Navajo and we monitored the upper aquifer in the Entrada, and it didn't drop. Anyway, no one else has done anything even remotely close to protect our water supply.
Thank you for restating that. We heard you that time. Are there any additional questions or clarification for the applicant? Okay, I'll also note for the record that Garish has joined us. So we are a full party now. With that, we will open this public hearing. If you are here to make a comment on this project, please post into the Zoom chat that you'd like to make a comment. I don't believe we have anybody called in on their phone, but if you are called in and I don't see you and you can't post into the chat, you're welcome to come off of mute now. I'll leave this open for just a moment to see if anybody joins from YouTube.
The one person who has called in has expressed that they're here, or the one phone number that we see has expressed that they're here to speak on the third public hearing.
Perfect. Thank you, Abby. Okay. Reed Pendleton, you are welcome to come off of mute and make your comment.
Yeah, hi. I've been involved just like Michael has in all the development plans for up there in the North 191 area. The housing up there is pretty limited. Most of the parcels up there are one house per 5 acres. That could create some problems, especially with the potential upcoming airport node that you guys will be discussing. Right now, to get housing, you're almost having to go to South Spanish Valley. And I had one of the workers at the airport that was looking at renting one of my long-term RV spots down here, and he wouldn't do it because it took him 45 minutes to get to the airport every morning. And, so I think there is some concerns about having some housing in that area. There is going to be development at some point up there. To what extent, I don't know. But it doesn't seem like there's too much housing developments coming up from up there. So I think maybe some kind of housing development would be a benefit for the area. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. And Troy, I see you. Would you like to come off of mute and make your comments?
Hi, commissioners. Thank you for your time. If I can, I wouldn't mind sharing my screen quickly. And I can pull up some maps, just make sure you're aware of some of the other items that might be happening.
Go ahead. And Troy, I'm so sorry. I'm blanking on your last name exactly. Would you mind just speaking it into the record for our minutes?
Sure, it's Troy Harold. I'm with the State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration. We manage, in this case, several thousand acres that kind of surround this development, as well as on the west side of Arches. The area of the map that hopefully is everyone's seeing that okay? Mm-hmm. And I think this has been a little more formalized since our last meeting. The legislature, and make sure the planning commission is aware, the state legislature approved funding to develop the Utah State Raptor Park. And that will be in conjunction with this property here that you can see is kind of the light gray between our parcels that are up north by the airport and south on the property that I've called in our last presentation, the Arches Overlook property. the legislature funded that, I believe it was about 7.5 million to purchase the land from us, and $40 million worth of improvements. And don't quote me on those numbers. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's pretty close to that, to do improvements to develop the Willow Springs area and Dalton Wells area into more of a state park. The exact boundary of that park has not been determined, but it's pretty close to this line here, leaving those two sections on the south end for us to do some type of a development similar to what I discussed with you at our meeting. I believe it was back in February. I know there was mixed reactions from the Planning Commission to our proposal, but I just want to kind of make sure you're aware of the fact that the Raptor Park is moving forward. I anticipate they'll be purchasing approximately those 3,000 acres plus or minus, and that'll be just north of Namaste Rocks property, which is right here. So just make sure you're aware of those other items that'll be taking place. As far as Sitla is concerned, I don't necessarily have any pros or cons, whether we're in favor of or against Michael's project. He reached out to us. We've talked about possibly coordinating on developments, et cetera. So I do think housing is a concern there, and I do think that should be looked at. The only thing I noticed is, and I quit sharing, but if you look at the topo map, there is the existing house is up kind of on a knoll, and the surrounding property around it, the house is seen from everywhere. On the eastern side of that property, there'd be some visual impacts for the development of our land. That would be a concern to me. On the western side of that property, there'll be visual impacts from the highway. So those are the only things I would caution the Planning Commission to be cognizant of as you look at the development of this property. But otherwise, I think as Michael said, housing is needed, and I would foresee some type of a housing project here. I'd maybe encourage Michael to look at a development where it's single story and built into the hillsides, similar to what we had originally proposed. I think that might be a architecturally better look type development than multi-story type townhome type development that we saw in the concepts. That would maybe be my only comment.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing your comments today, Troy.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here who'd like to speak as a part of this public hearing? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Nope, I'm sorry. I'm going to open it up again, and I'm going to give the applicant an opportunity to make a final comment if he would like. So did we lose our applicant?
I'm sorry, he must have gotten kicked off. I'm just admitting him, so let's give it a second to let his audio kick back in.
Hello, Michael, can you hear us?
I can't hear you. I'm just coming back though, so I don't know where you've been.
Well, we've had two comments, and now we'd like to invite you to make a final comment if you would like. There's no requirement to do so before we close the public hearing and have discussion as a body.
Very good. So in short, I mean, a lot of Grand County has been planned this way, not with a lot of foresight. The whole scenic protection plan doesn't have any housing. And as additional projects get added here, residential housing should have a priority. It should be the first thing that is put in place. So at least that is going to be supported in the future. And so the small lot residential here will allow us to add maybe 50 or 60 homes to the area that can support the area's workforce and support the overnight accommodations and other things, and maybe help for some relief in Moab's housing population. And anyway, if this is not done, it's understandable. Our lot is sandwiched in between two campgrounds, and maybe the best thing for it is to be overnight accommodations. I will make more money off overnight accommodations. So anyway, that's not I mean, as the planners, you guys get to plan and decide what's good for this, but I'm willing to be the first and make a concession to make less money off residential. And I hope you could give it the consideration. It's appropriate for the area. We are rural residential that's adjacent to highway commercial. Our property incorrectly was labeled as highway commercial when we bought the property. This is not that big of a stretch, and it's desperately needed. Anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Michael, I have one last question for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on. As I'm looking at the use table, I wonder why you chose your project to be under small lot residential versus resort special, which is the zone district that the county commission recommended for this area. So resort special supports single family dwelling, 2-family dwelling, townhomes, and multifamily dwelling, manufactured homes. So the uses that you've outlined, which are under small lot residential, are also available under resort special, but then there are more intentional, well, I guess I'm just curious, like what is the intent there behind choosing one versus the other?
I mean, the uses are very, very different. If resort special would allow us to build 50 homes on 24 acres, then we would do it. But resort special allows 1 unit per 5 acres. And so we would be able to build 4 units on our 24-acre parcel. And so if there's a misunderstanding on what you've created in there, maybe you could change that and we'd be happy to do resort special. But right now we can only put 4 homes there, and it's not something that will meet needs or could ever possibly be profitable. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing no additional comments in the chat or anyone else who wants to make a statement coming off of mute, we'll close this public hearing and open discussion as a body. Just a reminder, the way we've been doing this is any comments along the lines of whether or not we think we would or wouldn't support this. We just want to have a motion on the table first, and then we can continue to amend that motion. But discussion that allows us to get to a motion is useful.
I just want to also say that regardless of the staff recommendation, if you've heard things in the public hearing that you find compelling, the Planning Commission can absolutely make a recommendation outside of that.
Thank you, Abby. That's a great reminder. So I have some thoughts, but I will hold them to see if anyone else has anything they'd like to contribute.
I'd like to continue, Emily, your line of questioning on deed restriction, and maybe this is a staff question of what would prohibit deed restriction from being a possibility for a rezone in this area.
So it is a deed restriction would be a possibility, and the applicant has definitely expressed his sincere indication that he would like to, that he is very willing to deed restrict any residential units developed to be for workforce housing, or in some way that allows them to be used by the Moab community. The distinction is that we cannot require that of the applicant in this process. With the overnight accommodations overlay, for example, that process requires that a master plan be approved at the time that the overlay is granted, and that ties the applicant into what is on their master plan. This is just a rezone. It does not have any master plan requirement that would tie the applicant into any particular development specifics. So it's not to say, so a decision on a rezone wouldn't prohibit the applicant from making deed restrictions. The only thing is that a rezone does not tie in any specific development at all. And so a rezone could be granted to SLR, and then that parcel could be developed with anything that's allowed in SLR. So when considering a rezone, you should keep that in mind and not tie your decision to one specific development, because the applicant is not going to be held to any specific development with this rezone, even though I do believe that the applicant is very sincere in his intentions to develop the project that as he's outlined it.
Abby, as a recommending body, though, the county commission is ultimately the deciding body on this type of application. Would it be, well, not appropriate, that's the wrong word. Correct me if I'm wrong, that it would be feasible, should somebody want to make this motion, to say, I move to make an unfavorable recommendation unless the applicant presents a master plan with the following restrictions met. Because at this point, I mean, we are just a recommending body, so that could be a way of signaling the specific conditions in which we would.
Yeah. Well, the rezone process, and please jump in, Mary, if you have anything to add, but the rezone process does not have that stipulation in place. So there's no, unfortunately, you know, there's no way in a rezone application to tie an applicant to any specific project. And this is something that has prevented rezones from being granted in the past. You know, the primary consideration is if this zone makes sense in this place, not if this specific development is something you would want to see. I mean, clearly, if the rezone is granted and the applicant is able to develop, this is what they've stated as their intention, but that is, the approval today is only the rezone. There is not a mechanism within this rezone process to have an approved master plan.
And just to clear, oh, go ahead, Bob.
Isn't it the case that given our ordinances, it would be actually illegal to make requirements for the rezone in this case?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. So this case is only, you know, what planning commissioners should be considering at the core is, does a small lot residential zone make sense in this area?
A master plan,
Yeah.
that's another legislative decision though, correct?
Well, it's only tied to like PUDs and overlay zones. This that is just a straightforward rezone from one zone to another zone without, you know, the additional requirements that come into play with an overlay or a PUD. There's not a way to incorporate the master plan into that decision.
So here's my concern. I am not against housing in this area. I think that given existing development in the area and with the combination of the state's plan development and just the likelihood of development continuing in the area in some form, as well as the airport expanding, there likely is a need for housing in this area. Here are my concerns. The first is, I don't think we need housing of this density or of this number. I think there's a very low likelihood that there is a need for 80 residential units to support workforce housing north of the community. That doesn't mean that Grand County residents wouldn't value living in such a beautiful part of the county, but only just sort of from the workforce housing perspective, I don't know that meets the burden for me of the request. This is also going to be a very expensive place to develop. And we've already seen interest in the area for housing that is tied to resort development, and that is very clearly not intended for Grand County residents, and in fact could even have a very harmful effect on Grand County residents by continuing to drive up the cost of housing and creating pressure on other housing in the county. If this upzone were approved, and if this developer started their project, we can trust them that every single unit within that project was deed restricted to workforce housing, and that was that. I know that this applicant has been very great to be involved, but let's say this applicant comes into hard times, decides to leave the area, gets a great offer, and ultimately the property changes hands before that deed restriction is in place. Now we have a parcel with enormous amounts of density in an area that's also already interested in having more resort development, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. And we continue to perpetuate the problem that we have in our county today of housing going to people who don't live here, priced out for locals and hollowing out our economy. And that is where I am sitting on this. If there was a possibility, if there was a way to ensure that this would go to locals, I would feel very differently about this project. But given the fact that we don't, I know I just said I wanted a motion before I talk about the project itself. The reason I'm framing this here is I would love to know if there is anything that within the county, like, is there a solution to this that is creative or that we've seen before? Because if there's not, that changes the way that I assess this project going into a conversation.
Just one quick note too. I mean, an SLR rezone would, just as you said, allow for anything allowed in the SLR. If unforeseen things came up, a new owner could purchase that lot and just be beholden to what is allowed in the SLR. So that's definitely important to consider. Even though I think the applicant has done a very good job with developing water and septic, that is also going to be somewhat of a limiting factor to the full density that could be developed on that lot. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. It doesn't seem like a full build out of the maximum units SLR would allow. I'm sorry, I shouldn't speculate on that, but infrastructure, water, and sewer things are going to be, roads, those are all going to be somewhat limiting factors as well. But as far as, this is something that Mary and I discussed and that we've looked into, as far as some kind of creative solution that would allow for a rezone that is also tied to a specific project. To my knowledge, there's not a way to get that. We need to just consider the rezone as a SLR rezone. And do you have anything to add to that, Mary?
No. Actually, when our small area plan for that area was written up, and I know it's changed and I haven't looked at it, but it was specific to different nodes, and every node was tied to a road. So it was specific to make sure that what was built there stayed in an area that was already had a view problem to begin with. And I don't think this would be an area that would have a view shed problem. But just listening to everybody talk, one of the things that popped into my head was maybe the area, and like I said, I haven't paid attention to the new area plan, but the old area plan did have specific areas like the resort special, resort commercial. Maybe the land use code could specify somewhere that in that specific zone, you're allowed 20 units of housing, or some arbitrary number that would make more sense to everybody, to allow for the kind of housing we need out there. It sounds like something we need to look into in the future. And I haven't paid attention to the new area plan that you've got out there. That might have been something that could have been written in. And it still could change. You guys can change that anytime you want to. It's actually the planning commission's job.
Well, and that was the resort special was the area that we recommended that did have some of those density limitations.
That's exactly what you said. That's what brought it to my attention.
Yeah. Okay. Girish,
Madam Chair,
oh,
I would be interested in doing rural residential, and that's 1 unit per acre, but the less density will go ahead and price out a lot of locals. And so anyway, I'm happy to do less density, but the 1 unit per acre, but it significantly increases the price.
thank you. Girish, I see you've had your hands raised.
So this is kind of probably circuitous thinking. Emily, you were asking about, is there any way that we could have an agreement ahead of time and not get into trouble with, which I think Abby was trying to describe, which is illegal for us to do. It's a quid pro quo. You promise to do this and we will recommend that. and maybe this is a stupid idea, but what about if he applied for the high density housing overlay, and then there was, as part of that, he would have a, and if the development agreement had terms in it that the planning commission thought met the intent of the, it would be an overlay along with the zone change to resort special. Does that make sense? Is that possible to do?
Yeah, I think I understand. I mean, you're basically asking, could the applicant get this type of development by using the HDHO tool? And if you recall, there's a couple things on that. The HDHO eligibility map does not include parcels in this area. So
I realize that.
So when we were creating the HDHO, for some of you newer planning commission members, there's a map that shows eligibility throughout the entire county of which parcels can apply to be in the HDHO and what sort of density bonus they could get. And this parcel is outside of that. So that would be one problem. Another issue is that the HDHO sunset clause is set to take effect on June 18th of this year. And at this point, I don't think a fresh development could get all the ducks in a row in time to receive that approval prior to the sunset clause. This is something that the planning commission could ask county commission, or Tricia, you could convey this idea to county commission that when the sunset clause for the HDHO takes effect, the county commission can decide to extend that or or do nothing with it for a year and then reopen it. And so I think with the HDHO as it is on the ground today, that would not be possible for this parcel. However, that could be something that the county commission could incorporate into a possible renewal or extension of the HDHO, but that's a lot of speculation. So.
Abby, I have one last clarifying question going back to my original thinking. And again, forgive my ignorance. Putting aside the QPQ, is there anything preventing, or is there a mechanism that would allow for the applicant independently to register some sort of restriction against the existing deed that would follow to any subdivisions as a mark of good faith? Because this will move forward before the county commission, regardless of what recommendation this body makes tonight. And if that was something that the applicant wanted to be able to demonstrate that they had already shown that they would close the loop on their willingness to fulfill that, could potentially be something that the county commission takes into consideration because it's in the record.
I'd have to go to the legal review to make sure. I've never heard of anything like that happening.
I will reach out to legal review prior to this being scheduled. Actually, I mean, this project will go into legal review before it is seen at the county commission. And I'll make sure to touch on that point with the county attorney and see their response. So.
Bob?
Yeah, I want to.
Sorry, Steve. Bob had his finger up, and then you can go.
Go ahead, Bob. Oh, sorry, I didn't see.
I was only going to say that this density is too great. As far as I can see in the kind of small area planning that we went through, and I guess also the plan that came before it for that area, there was not a thought of having 4 units, per acre that you have in a small lot residential. And the only way I would think about approving such a thing would be if there was some mechanism where we could see a master plan that would limit the housing and limit where it was. Right now, I can't feel very favorable toward this rezone.
Steve? You're muted.
Yeah, I'm feeling similar to some of the sentiments and thoughts you shared, Emily. Right now, I'm leaning, towards it would have to be an unfavorable recommendation. Though I personally have gone through this process and didn't get a favorable recommendation from the Planning Commission, but then we got the job done. We got the vote in the county commission. And I do think if there was something to like that show of good faith, because once we make this zoning shift, I mean, it's you've got rights. You can do whatever you want with that. And that does make me nervous for the reasons that you had mentioned, Emily. This is a tough one for me. I know the applicant and Michael Scarta and they've gone through a lot with this and back and forth and just like, what do you want me to do with this? I just want to own that. It's a hard one, and we do need housing, but it's a tricky spot up there.
Garish? Oh, Rick. Garish, I'm going to go to Rick because he hasn't had a chance to speak, and then we'll come back to you. Nope, you're muted still. There you are.
It looked to me, when I went back and looked at what Troy and the Sitla people had put in back in February, January, there's going to be something like this, even though they had some housing on lots, large lots, there looked to me like there was some multiple use things. So we're going to be looking at that. If we even get to look at Sitla stuff, I don't know if we do or not, but there's going to be some of that out there if Sitla goes through with this, at least in one or more of their options. So it may not be as high on the horizon as far as, a look at me type thing. Maybe it will be a lower one, but there's going to be some of this type housing out there anyhow. Sitla goes ahead. One of the things I noticed that I think that Michael has plenty of water. The sewer one, it looked like each building was going to have its own sewer plant instead of a leach field, which with the current house was going to be buried out there underneath that cul-de-sac. But anyway, I have a little concern there, but I'm sure that's solvable because some of our motels have solved problems similarly. So yeah, maybe not quite as dense, but something like that's going to be headed our way out there anyhow.
Garish? No, muted.
So other ways this property zoned other than SLR and the app receive make a profit off of the. So I'm just going to throw this out. I don't know if you talked to him about like rural residential with a PUD, which would retain a lot of the open space and to kind of hide the houses that are developed. Was that something that you even discussed with him, and is that a possibility?
I mean, we could discuss other options, but I just want to keep focused on the question at hand of an SLR rezone.
And I'll just quickly pop in here. We've had these controversial is the wrong word. I'm sorry. We've had these similar applications that have come before us that have been sort of tricky. And there have been times when there have been some of that speculation of, could we do this? Could we do that? I mean, ultimately, it is the applicant's responsibility to propose to the county their use for the area. And then the county weighs based off of planning records and citizen input and constraints, environmental constraints, and so on, whether they think that that's the right approach. And if the county ultimately says it's not, And the applicant may say, well, what about this approach? And, I realize this has been a very time expensive, I'm sure monetarily expensive process for the applicant who's gone through this a few times. But ultimately, as uncomfortable as it is, much as we want to not see people have to go through those hoops, it is ultimately the burden on the applicant to make that case, and not planning staff and not this body. So I think I share in your thoughts, Garish, of trying to find a solution. But I do just want to make sure that we're all aware that it's ultimately that, that's how the ball swings. So Makeda.
Yeah, I want to echo what you were saying, Emily, about your feelings about this, but I also think, and then what Garish was saying about trying to find a solution, because I'm sitting here trying to think about solutions of like, how could this work? How can we make sure that it's going to be what he says it's going to be, and all these other concerns. But I do think property is an investment, and we're not responsible to help fix those oversights or whatever, where he was saying, it was zoned incorrectly on one map and correctly on another, which is, I empathize with that. And that is really unfortunate. And this sounds like a really awful process that he's been going through for quite some time. But I echo that sentiment. I don't know if something like of less density, the small lot housing, I don't know a ton about that specific type of zoning on the details, but I don't know if there's a way to make it less dense and reapproach it, or like you were saying, but is there a way to go back and forth? Like you were saying, the responsibility is on the property owner, but to say, maybe here's an unfavorable recommendation to the county council, and then they could potentially, commission, and then they can recommend as they choose, but provide, feedback basically on what they would consider.
So I think we should refocus and maybe get a motion on the table specific to the SLR rezone. When I present this to the county commission, I will definitely do my best to give the context of this conversation. And I just saw in the chat, Michael Scarda, the applicant, just said, I'm asking for small lot residential. I can only build homes. Yeah, and you can look at the use table. Small lot residential is residential. So it
Right.
really allows for mostly that use. But so let's focus on the question at hand here, and hopefully someone can make a motion soon.
You're absolutely right, Abby. I broke my own rules, and then I wanted to make sure that I wasn't the only one breaking them. So, okay, you're absolutely right, though. We've had an opportunity for everybody to speak just in general. I have one final question for the applicant. Sounds like, Michael, you can still hear us. You made a comment earlier that less density would price out local residents. Is it therefore right to assume that with the way you've looked at any potential projects for this area, if you were to receive the subzone, that you would have to have full build out in order to make this project affordable? Or, I mean, I'm just curious to know if that, again, I know that it's not required of the specifics of this, but I think given the uniqueness of this particular application, just kind of understanding that trade-off would be very useful to me. And you're not required to answer, but it would be helpful. And I don't know if you can hear me either. Okay, well, that's maybe a question that the county commission might pose. Okay, let's go ahead and get a motion on the table. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'm going to go ahead and do it. I move to forward an unfavorable recommendation of the Namaste Rock small lot residential rezone to the Grand County Council.
Commission. Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Garish. Okay, any discussion? Bob, you're welcome to go first. Oh, sorry, Josie, we generally let the person who makes the motion have a chance, and then we'll pass it off.
Yeah, I think that this density is too high for the area, given the small area plan. One of the reasons we, in fact, used resort special as kind of the preferred zone for, and probably thinking of rezoning, was that it had only one unit per 5 acres. We discussed it in great detail at the time, and I think 80 houses in that small of an area is just too much. I think there was a lot of public input in addition to the small area plan that said it wasn't really to be a residential area. And I think it meant kind of a dense residential area. So that's why I made my motion.
Okay, Garish, do you have any comment as the second?
I basically just echo what Bob said. I think it wasn't envisioned that this area was going to be used for, particularly not residential at this density. And I think it's appropriate then go back and sort of redo the intents of the county with a resort special, except for this part, which is going to be small art residential. It's just, it's that the county would make that kind of paradigm shift for this area.
All right, Josie?
Yeah, this will echo a lot of what's already been said. I mean, I recognize the supreme unfairness that someone like Michael, who has clearly good intentions towards creating long-term housing for people who live here, might not be able to do that while, you know, Sitla may be able to develop without any oversight by us, with more of an eye towards profit than service to the community, and that Michael's property is surrounded by you know, overnight uses that are more profitable as well. I recognize the supreme unfairness of that, and I just really want that to be on the record, that zooming out, it feels really hard to make a judgment call like this. But I'm in general agreement that to have this kind of density in that area, in my mind, could only be acceptable if it was tied to affordable housing. And I think that a future discussion about, because in my recollection, I don't recall the survey. I remember a couple of county commission members expressing that maybe this would be a good place for local housing to a degree. I don't think it got fleshed out a ton. But I do think it's worth addressing that question in the future of whether this seems like a feasible and whether it seems like a housing node that is attractive, I guess, to the community. And if so, in the conversation of potentially extending the high density housing overlay and expanding it to areas such as this, I think is a worthy future conversation to have. Because looking at that map today, I was definitely, you know, filled with the question of why is high density housing only sort of focused on the southern corridor right now, and is there a thought towards how that might be focused north in the future? So I personally feel committed to continuing that conversation, and I would really encourage Michael to keep kind of part of that conversation too, because I would love to see affordable housing out there if it was feasible and could be guaranteed. And I appreciate the vision and the intent behind this project. But just given the way that things work, I could not just blindly approve a rezone for this parcel and just have good faith that it's going to work out.
Just quickly, before you go for a vote, or Makeda asked in the chat if there is a minimum build out with an SLR zone. The maximum build out is clearly defined. There is no minimum build out. So a person could have an SLR zone and build below the density. There's no number required for a development inside an SLR zone.
That is why I have major concerns about this project. Or excuse me, about this application, because I can mentally leap to the types of problems that any potential project on this property could run into. And as I stated earlier, we already know that there's interest in using this area for resort homes. We're at a really interesting place as a county. We do have homes coming online through the high density housing overlay. We also have lots of housing coming online through projects that are clearly designed and priced for people who don't live and work here. And I don't think that the housing in that second category is what this county needs more of. And in fact, it can have a very, very harmful effect on what remaining properties we have available for development. I want to see properties that we have available for residential development to make its way into the arms of locals and to force prices down. There's something to be said that the more supply you bring online, there's a natural market forcing function, but given all sorts of things happening right now in the world, income inequality, the interest in people moving out of cities, the increase of remote work that allows people of high income to do so, the increase of alternative currencies and alternative and stock prices that give people more disposable income. If a developer had this zone district available to them, and well-intentioned or not, they were not able to fulfill their intent and it changed hands, I don't see the likelihood very high that another person would take that risk to provide low-income housing. And I think it's very likely it would become a tourism-based housing development in this area. So that being said, I will go ahead and say, this is where I would be very open to the idea of combining nightly rentals with affordable housing. And that's something that's come up in past discussions, where affordable housing keeps the margins very thin and where development is very expensive. If this was a proposal for an overnight accommodation overlay with a master plan that included a limited number of nightly rentals or other types of uses, no hotels, but a limited type of nightly rentals as a means to offset deed restricted affordable housing, that's actually something that I think I would support. And that came up in my mind as I was reviewing this, especially given the uses in this area. When we went through that process of the overnight accommodations overlay, one of the questions came up was, what is a community value that would offset overnight accommodations that the county would be open to? And I do think that housing is one of those for me. I want to see more housing come in the area, and I am very hesitant to send a negative recommendation on anything related to housing. But I don't think I can support this project, this upzone, this application on its face. But I will signal very strongly that I would definitely support some sort of combination there, if that's what it took to guarantee and to effectively make viable the ability to bring affordable housing, workforce housing online. So that's obviously not on the table, but I do think it's worth sort of exploring the why behind this, because anytime you're talking about housing, it's very sensitive. Okay. Anyone else have any comments to contribute? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and take a vote.
I just want to state for the record, I really echo what you say. I think that could be a really great solution, Emily, or possible solution. Same thing about this, such a sensitive issue. Really, I look at this as if we were to approve the zoning change, we have no teeth, and it could wind up a community detriment. I would love more housing. Yeah, that's where I'm at with it.
Okay. Anyone else?
This is just a question for clarification on what you just said, which I definitely am interested in too. It looks like on the overnight accommodations overlay map, that parcel is currently not a possible parcel, but am I correct in that an upzone to a resort special would?
It wouldn't. I do think let's maybe return a general conversation of overnight accommodations to future considerations. Just general clarification, it would take a changing of I need Kevin Walker here because he was so good at these two different terms. There's a eligibility zone and then there's a applied map. And so it would take two steps. Which, yeah.
The OAO, any parcel can apply to have it. The HCHO had eligibility zones. The OAO, any parcel can apply to have the OAO applied to that parcel. But again, I really want to refocus on the question at hand, not theoretical other things this applicant could pursue.
Thank you, Abby. This is obviously a very difficult topic. Any last comments? Otherwise, I'll call the question. Okay, seeing none, there is a motion on the table made by OB and seconded by Garish to send a unfavorable recommendation of the Namaste Rock Small Lot Residential Rezone to the Grand County Commission. All in favor, raise your hand or say aye. This is in favor of sending an unfavorable recommendation. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that is unanimous on that motion. Okay. Thank you to the applicant. I know that this conversation did take some detours. I do hope that this at least provided some more clear guidance and hopefully gives the applicant some options to consider before moving forward to the county commission. We will move forward to our next public hearing to solicit oral and written comment on the Willow Springs Campground Overnight Accommodations Overlay application. So actually, Josie here is a perfect example of your question. Steve, looks like you have a question before we turn it over to staff.
Yeah, Abby, did you hear anything back from Chris or Christina?
Yes.
Do I need to go off video?
Yes, you can participate by asking questions, but you do need to abstain from voting. And if you do have questions, I would keep them short and neutral. So yeah, so just as a general clarification, this is what we thought, but confirmed by Christina Sloan. If anyone's immediate family members are going to be financially affected by a decision, that is a decision that they should abstain from participating in. So, actually, Steve, just to be safe, it would be good if you went off video. If you have any questions that are, just clarification or fact-based questions, please throw those in the chat and we'll answer them. Yeah, thank you for bringing that back up again. So
thank you, Steve, and thank you, Abby. Okay, so now we'll actually invite Abby to stay off mute and give us the staff report.
Okay, yeah, so this project, is in the same general area as the previous application we were considering. This project is a proposal for the overnight accommodations overlay. And because of the nature of the overlay, this does tie to an approval of a site plan or a master plan. So the plan that's included in the packet, should this be approved by the county commission, assuming no changes, no small tweaks happen between here and there, should the overnight accommodations overlay be approved for this parcel, the applicant will be tied to that master plan and can only make very kind of minor adjustments to it without having to go back to the OAO process and get essentially, if they got approved with this master plan and wanted to do something different, they would have to go through the OAO process again. It's tied very specifically to that plan. And as such, I think this applicant has done an incredibly thorough job of addressing each point in the overnight accommodations overlay, as well as the small area plan, scenic resource protection district of the area, which is why staff is recommending this for approval. The overnight accommodations overlay and the scenic protection district are both essentially a list of, if we see development in this area or if we see development of this type, this is what we want to see. This applicant has addressed all of those points. And yeah, so what they're applying for is, and so we can discuss more details of this project because that is tied to this rezone in a way that the previous project was not. So this is an application for a 60-unit campground, which would be, I believe, a mixture of RV, primarily RV and some tent sites. And let me see. This definitely meets the intent of the OAO. This applicant has worked with Grand County throughout the process of developing both the small area plan and the OAO, and has experience running a RV park on the south end of town. The one issue of concern is that, so included in your packet are 2 street view photos. It's not quite the level of view shed analysis that might ultimately be required should this be approved, but I think does give commissioners a pretty good sense of what development on this parcel would look like. And the applicant can speak a little more to the specifics, but there's some specifics of the topography of the site that would provide some screening and have this development be within the desired result of the scenic protection district, while also allowing for a development of this project. And when we were discussing the overnight accommodations overlay, and just a little bit of background for the newer commissioners, the OAO is broken into 3 categories: hotel, motel, residential uses or residential developments that have OA uses, and RV campground. And there are fewer units of RV spaces available proportionally than there are hotel rooms. So that is one thing to consider too when looking at this specific project. I think everything else is laid out in the packet. Are there any questions for staff?
I will just call out, I asked staff and staff wasn't entirely sure. So I'll also ask the applicant if he knows to comment on this, but the applicant brought up the use of porta potties out on a distributed camping area near to this. And I was just curious in assessing community benefits or offsetting impact, if that's something that the county had installed, which might, indicate some sort of recognition of impact. And it sounds like the county did not install them, but the county is also not sure who did. It may have been UDOT, or it may have been a federal agency, or it may have been someone else. Is that accurate, Abby? Did I correctly state that?
Yeah, I mean, and Mary can tell you, pretty much our best guess is that might have been put out by UDOT, either for UDOT employees or because that area, as the applicant outlined in the public comment that they submitted, included at the beginning of the packet, that area is used a lot for informal camping. And so it could be possible the state put those there to mitigate impact of their area. But yeah, I was not able to find a definite answer to that question today.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's DNR.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, mostly I was just wanting to make sure that I was curious if it was the county that had installed those. So again, just clarifying questions for staff, and then I see the applicant is ready to speak. So we'll invite you to speak in just a moment, Reed. Garish, did you have your hands raised with a question?
Let's see.
Nope. You were good before. There you are.
Yeah, I was just going to say, DNR put the porta potty. So.
All right.
I was just going to answer your question.
Great, thank you.
I had a question, Abby. The current zoning of this is?
I believe it is range grazing.
Resort special.
Resort special. I'm sorry. I was checking on that as I was saying it. Thank you for jumping in, Reed.
I somehow had missed it. I had somehow missed it in the report. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Reed, for jumping in on that.
I think with that, if there is no other clarifying questions, just of the staff report specifically in the packet, then Reed, I'll welcome you to come off of mute. Reed Pendleton.
Yeah, thanks. Abby covered quite a bit of what I was going to say. This is a 2.5-year project that I started actually before the moratorium, and then I spent a full year with the county actually developing the standards for the overnight accommodations for campgrounds. And then last year I applied for this, and the Planning Commission and County Commission both thought that the area plan needed to be done first, which was the basis for their denial, basically. And I was told to bring it back basically after the area plan was done by several commissioners. So worked with the commissions through the whole area plan. That got passed at the first of the year, and I reapplied for that. And through a few delays this spring, we're finally here. I have tried to address everything in the OAO development standards and the area plan. We're very conservative on our energy, water consumption, wastewater reuse. All of it will be top of the line or better. I'm a local, so I completely understand where the county is trying to go with things. This would, I think, be potentially the first overnight accommodation to be approved since the moratorium, which goes to show that not very many people are willing to do the overnight accommodations development standards. And it does add a significant cost, 25 to 30% overhead, from the build out. But the demand for RV and camping accommodations in this town is beyond a need. Last fall, we were literally sending people all the way to Price, Utah, and Grand Junction because people could not find spaces in Moab, in Monticello, in Green River. And so they stay outside the county, and then they commute here 45 minutes to an hour to still recreate. And so, or they go to the public lands north of town. And, we're still, what I kind of, discussed to the county commission is that all these people are still coming. It's not like a hotel. If the hotel rooms are all booked, people go somewhere else. But most of these people are bringing their hotel room with them in the form of an RV, and they literally will park anywhere. And, we do our best to educate people where to go. Unfortunately, that public comment that I sent to the county commission at the beginning of the agenda kind of goes to help facilitate my point that area basically across the street from this property has been long overdue for some development. We will offer, public facilities, public showers, things like that to help as many people as we can in that area. Services are definitely in need out there. So, that's the gist of it. There's a few commercial uses that I have incorporated. Last year I had a mixed use plan that was theoretical because I didn't know what was needed out there. And through the area plan, it was whittled down to a few uses, which I've incorporated into this plan. And I still do have an outfitter interested in establishing a location on the property. We've included a small cafe, restaurant, and a couple houses. And so we've incorporated several of those mixed use components into it, which we're committed to building. I think they're all good uses for the area. Just building the right style and right desired type will be the key element for us to figure out. So I think that's the overview of it, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the applicant?
Reed, what kind of outfitter has reached out to you to be on that property? Like what would you do for their business?
It's actually not in this county, so it'd be a new outfitter that would right now they do ATV tours, so they're kind of seeing where some of that stuff would end up before they commit to stuff like that. But they do mixed use, different hiking tours, bikes and ATVs.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, it's 6:26. I will open this public hearing. If you are on YouTube and you'd like to join, there's a slight lag, but you're welcome to join now. If you are in the meeting and you'd like to make a comment, please post into chat that you'd like to comment. And I see one person, Michael Scarda, has posted. So go ahead and make your comment, Michael.
So when the small area plan was proposed, there was some concern that the Dalton Wells project, anyway, it's Utah State Raptor Park, and that ended up getting passed. But there was a last concern that all the restrictions would go ahead and prohibit that park from going in place, that the state government wouldn't be willing to meet the small area plan restrictions. And so there was a clause put in that that the government doesn't have to follow those rules. And so if the Utah Raptor State Park didn't pass, then Grand County, as I understand, had it arranged to go ahead and manage the state campground. And anyway, to me, it would be terribly, terribly it already has been. This has already been rejected. And right after you rejected this, you went ahead and the county planned on having a campground at the Dalton Wells. Anyway, the Utah Raptor State Park is coming, and it should, and it will do a great deal of good. And I supported that project, and I campaigned for it. But if government is the only one that can go ahead and put in a campground, and the small guys that go ahead and help with all this labor come ahead and participate and work in government and live here, and they're not able to build a campground, there is something terribly, terribly, terribly wrong. Anyway, I strongly support the campground. It totally deserves to come here, and please do not prohibit this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is anybody else here to make a comment for this public hearing? Reed, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, not really. I mean, I am a local. I've been here 7 years. I did come here with an opportunity to run a campground, and I've turned that into one of the highest rated campgrounds here in town. Through that, I've also been able to purchase other properties in town. I have 14 currently long-term rentals in town that are rented to locals that work here. I'm actually closing on a house tomorrow for some employee housing. So I'm committed to this county. I've been very involved. I'm going to be here for a while. I think this is a deserving project in a needed area. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind staying on, if anyone has any additional questions for the applicant, that way we can ask them of you. Seeing no one else here to comment, I'll close the public hearing and open discussion. And I actually want to start by mentioning, I drove out to the Willow Springs area yesterday. I went out first to the town bridge because I know that there's a lot of illegal camping there that happens. And then I drove out to the site of this project, and then I drove out to Willow Springs, kids in tow. And I stopped at 19 sites, making up about 30 vehicles, and talked to 52 people amongst those groups. And what I was really curious about and what I was asking people is, we're considering a project in this area that could add camping and RV sites. If that was available, if they had sites available, would you be more likely to stay there or more likely to seek out camping like Willow Springs? And here's what I found. about 2/3 of the people preferred dispersed camping. They would stay on Willow Springs and in that area, even if there was another alternative available to them. But many of them said that they would like to have access to more amenities and that they have to go into town currently to get those amenities, and that it's, they would find something like that valuable, even though they would camp in the dispersed area. 1/3 of those who said that they would prefer an RV park were kind of split. So some of them said, that's just absolutely what I prefer. And I'm so angry with you all that you don't have sites available to me. And then another group said, I might stay there for a night to make use of the showers. One woman said she likes dispersed camping, but she tends to feel safer in RV parks. So it was a bit of a mixed bag. One other thing that struck me as really interesting was 3 different groups said that they liked to use their dirt bikes and their ATVs in the northern area of the county. And it just made me wonder, and this is not a sure thing, but it did sound like, given the uses in the area, that they didn't see themselves taking their ATVs into town. If they could camp out there at an RV site, and all 3 who wanted to be able to do this would have preferred the RV site, said that they wanted it because of access to the trails to the north of town. And I thought, while it won't cure the problem, that could potentially decrease some of the ATV noise in town, which I thought was really interesting. Definitely interested in the services, including showers. And one person said they'd like to see more trees in the area. And I guess the last comment, just from speaking to all these people, well, 2 more things. One is, I was asking after I had that first question, is your choice more to do with price or amenities, or do you just want to be outdoors, for those people who said they'd rather be outdoors? And again, it was about split. Some of them said, we'd be willing to pay for one night, but generally we can't afford to stay there. Everyone down at the town bridge said that nope, no RV parks, and they couldn't afford it. So take that data as you will. I guess the last thing is just with the amount of demand for the area, I don't see any evidence that camping in the area, RV site and designated camping in the area would decrease the impact. It's kind of like interstate highways. You build another lane and it just, more people tend to show up. If you build it, they will come. But that in of itself, I think, isn't a reason not to consider this project. But I just thought you all might be interested in some of that data that I collected yesterday. So, all right. So that's my thoughts. Reed, did you want to just comment to that?
Yeah, if I could. The price of a campsite in this town is getting out of hand, and that is due to supply and demand. Right now, of the commercial parks in this town, there's only 2 that are locally owned. Everything else has gone to corporations. In fact, one corporation owns over 50% of the town campsites right now, Sun RV Resorts. It's not uncommon for a full hookup RV site at some of these big corporations to be over $120 a night. I am the cheapest RV park in town, and I'm around $60 this year. That's a raise of about 11% over last year. And it gets to a point where we have to refer people to Monticello and Green River for hookups. They can spend 2 nights in Green River for the same that they can spend 1 night in Moab. And so the supply and demand is so skewed that it's not just what you're seeing out on the dispersed camping. It's the people who are going for hookups, but they're going 45 minutes to an hour out. And that's sales tax money that this county isn't collecting. That's TRT money this county isn't collecting. That's revenue that business owners are not collecting. And we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But yet those people are still driving down here, 45 minutes to Arches and using our infrastructure. They are still creating the congestion and the noise and everything else in town, but we're not benefiting at all from that. And so, there is multiple facets to our lack of campsites here.
Thank you. One last data point I forgot to add was, of the people I spoke with, it was very evenly split in both groups between people who had sort of full-size RVs or towed trailers and people who were camping or car camping or van camping. So I didn't see sort of a split. I talked to a couple of people who had a full-size RV and would prefer the distributed camping, and people who were in a car who would prefer the site. So just thought that was interesting. Reed, you've really have been very close to this project, or excuse me, to this planning effort. For those of you new to the body, there were several late evenings where Reed stayed in the council chambers as we were debating the small area planning. And the overnight accommodation work that was going on at the time. Okay, any other comments? And I will preface, not to break my rules this time, if we're speaking to the value one way or another or likelihood to vote, I will ask for a motion on the table.
Actually, I have one more question for Reed. It looks like there's a lot of water-wise intent on the property with reuse of rainwater and black water. And I wonder how the pool fits into that, whether that's reclaimable water or how that fits in.
Actually, the pool we haven't dove too far into yet. That's kind of the last development stage that we would do. And so I don't have a clear answer on how the pool would fit in. It's also something that we don't have to build. If it's not necessary. We don't have a pool at my current operation, and that's never been a problem for us. And so it's more of a site plan as to what is wanted by a lot of campers, but it's not a necessity.
Mm-hmm. And I should say that this application has met all of the requirements for this phase of the project. Things like the real nitty gritty of like the pool water would come into play at site plan approval if the overnight accommodations overlay were approved with this master plan. At site plan is when kind of all that engineering and like the real nitty gritty would come in. And so it's not required for the applicant to have answers to that level at this point, but that when that is being worked out at site plan, everything would still be required to fit the requirements of the OAO.
Any other discussion? Okay, is there a motion? Anyone? Our tendency as a body is not to have the chair make a motion, but I can't remember if that's explicitly in our bylaws or Robert's rules. So I'm happy to put a motion on the table.
Well, maybe we should discuss. I have to say that in general, I'm not a big fan of overnight accommodations, but this seems relatively reasonable to me and not a bad use in this area. So I kind of, I certainly lean favorable on this, but I'd be interested in hearing from other folks who may have other views on the commission.
So before we talk, I know this is, again, different than what we did on the last one. That was my fault. I do think if we're going to talk about it, let's have a motion. So Bob, would you like to make a motion? You don't have to vote for your own motion in the end.
Of course I don't. Let's see, do I have, yes, I'm not muted. I move to send a favorable recommendation to apply the overnight accommodations overlay RV/campground to the Brown County parcel numbered 0400200038 located at 13733 North Highway 101.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Rick. All right, OB and then Rick, any discussion?
Just that this seems like a reasonable use. So I understand it. It's of course within the resort special zone that's already applicable to the property. There seems to be a need for this kind of facility. And I think it's appropriate. I also appreciate the part of this that has it in rows, that is the sites in rows to minimize the visual impact. So it's why I made the favorable recommendation, reserving the right to change my mind after we discuss it.
So reserved. Rick, did you have any discussion?
Not so much discussion, just a comment. I like the way they're going to rearrange the entrance to that where it's better sight lines along the highway. There's a big old space there right now where people are running in and out of there in a long stretch with, they're coming from one direction, but coming from a lot of places. So anyhow, that's a good part of this too. So.
Okay, Garish.
So let me start out by saying that I really appreciate Reed's diligence and persistence. And, you know, he does provide quality overnight accommodations for RV campers. And so I don't have any problem with that. But Pandora's box has been opened. When are we going to say no to any more tourists? We're overrun with tourists as it is. This location helps to into Moab, but if those people come into Moab, it's just going to help. I think good, solid plan in place, but I do disagree with Bob that there is a need, there is a demand. The demand, advertising, the demand has been created by word of mouth. The demand has been created by, we created by starting to collect TRT. But my question, and continues to be, what does Grand County need? What does our community need versus more RV camping or more camping in general? So I'm just throwing that out as the demand is there. If the demand's not there, they can create the demand by more advertising. But I think Green River and maybe Thompson and maybe Monticello and maybe some other communities would be a better place from a community standpoint for us to be developing more hotels and other types of overnight accommodations. So I'm just going to say that. I don't know how I'm going to vote yet. Like Bob, I want to listen, but there is a need to cut back any way we can possibly cut back on the chaos that Moab has turned into, because we have so many hotels, so many RV parks, it's so many campgrounds. It's when are we as a community going to say enough is enough is enough? We don't need it. You might have a demand for it. You may eventually charge $200 a night for an RV site. Good on you, but you could probably do that in Cisco or in Thompson or in Green River. So I think you get the drift.
Garish, you were cutting out there a bit, but I was able to get all of your comments, or at least the gist of it. Does anyone have any clarification for Garish that they missed in the comments that they wanted to ask? Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't miss anything. I hear you. Part of me is of the mind, and I think I may have voiced this around the conversation of the noise ordinance as well. As a body, as a county, our duty is not to the visitor. It's not. We may want our visitors to have a wonderful time, and we may recognize its strength or its dominance in our economy, but ultimately our duty is to our residents. At the same time, I think our duty is to our residents creating economic opportunity. And this is a distinct one because we would be allowing a use that is currently not, there is no additional place for this use to happen. But what we have seen over the last several years is that the primary ownership of these types of accommodations tend to be big box, big name, big brand, and not locally located. And one of the reasons why I have been open to the idea of B&Bs in the past in a single room in a home is because I do think that locals should be able to opt in to this economy that is currently being dominated by and extracted from by people who don't live here. And that includes for housing ownership and it includes for business ownership. And so I am much more willing to support a project that is created by a local, especially a local who's been so involved. Also, and this is the other thought that I had in my mind as I was playing with this weekend, while it's not a guarantee in either way, if the county continues to be entirely restrictive of any sorts of overnight accommodation development, unfortunately, I think our state legislature has proven that it often takes it upon itself to intervene in places where it doesn't feel like the county is equitably creating economic benefits or setting its markets up efficiently. This is an example of a project that I think is sort of the gold standard of the types of projects we would like to see, with the exception of projects that include housing with them. I like the idea of sending the message to potential developers that it's not that Grand County is closed for business, it's that Grand County is closed to you taking advantage and then leaving or not living here and extracting. Grand County is opposed to exploitation. We are not okay with that, but we are okay in certain instances, in cases where the developer demonstrates good intent and then follow through on that, including in its environmental standards, to be open to some flexibility of development in this area. And so that's where I land. And it's why I think I am in support of this project, which by no means suggests a support of other types of projects like this that don't meet the standard, or even other types of projects like this in the area. But this particular developer, I think, has been involved from the beginning, and that means something to me. So that's my comments. Abby.
Oh, I just want to clarify quickly, this proposed master plan does include 5 employee housing sites and 2 residences.
Forgot, yes, thank you.
Fulfill that mixed use and employee housing requirement as well.
An additional star. Thank you. No, I had missed that in my notes, but I had seen that going through. Okay. Anyway, that was my opinion. Girish, I see your hand, but I'd love to give Makeda an opportunity to speak, or I think Steve is abstaining from discussion. So Makeda, did you have anything you wanted to contribute to the conversation?
Yeah, I just want to, I'll keep it short, but I just, I think I really appreciate everything that Reed has put into this, and I agree with you that this is the gold standard. But I do think that, hearing that potentially an ATV business would be coming in, and knowing that it's just more overnight rentals, and knowing the last 2 years have been an overwhelming, resounding cry of please stop building overnight rentals in our community from the constituents. I don't feel like I can support this. So that's my personal opinion, is just based on what the community has been asking for. That's how I stand on this.
Okay, Girish, and then Josie afterwards.
I was just going to react to Abby. To me, it's a reality that people who have overnight accommodations in our community are or buy housing for them because there's no other housing. But need for, say, 5 employees in this area, and they for those 5 employees, it's a net zero. It hasn't helped our housing crisis one bit. It's a wash. So I just wanted to say that they're going to build housing for their workers is all well and good, but that's a necessity because there's no way they would be able to find people who would try to rent in Moab with the high prices we have and then drive out all that way every day to go to work. To me, it really is irrelevant to the discussion we're having.
Josie?
Yeah, well, first I had a clarifying question based on what Abby said about the employee housing and long-term spots. Were those part of the, because I know there's a proposed sort of swap for the open space requirement for like a mixed use that includes that. So are you talking about what's in that, or is this in the original, in what's not that 3 acres of open space?
So, I mean, it is not in the open space. The open space requirement in this particular project is a requirement of the OAO, not a density for open space.
No, I know, but within Reed's proposal, there is a suggestion of pursuing a vision of trading that open space requirement for additional mixed use, which includes employee housing. So I'm just trying to sort out what is where, because I'm getting a little bit lost in the packet.
Okay, I apologize. I'm not exactly sure what what part of the packet that was included in.
It was in Reed's statement.
That was, okay, Reed just entered into the chat. I included his statement from his proposal the first time he submitted, as well as his most recent statement that addresses the small area plan and the scenic corridor, because I thought that provided some historical context, and I can absolutely see how that's confusing. And so what's referenced in that letter was when Reed was developing this project and didn't have his mixed use component locked down the way that it currently is with the site plan that was included in the packet. So okay. I apologize for that confusion. I should have given that first letter a little more context.
Okay. So to clarify, the mixed use, which includes employee housing, has been separated from the open space requirement and is now just part of the master plan.
Yeah, what's shown on that master plan, you can see there's 5 units of employee housing, and then there are also 2 residences, which is the amount of single family homes that could be put on that property based on the underlying zoning density.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the final. So were this to be approved by the county commission, this plan with those 5 employee housing units and those 2 residences would be what was, that would be what was required. That would be the piece that was recorded. So.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. And then as far as sort of my feelings on this, I am equally torn as Makeda and Garish are, because I mean, just driving outside of, just driving anywhere in town right now, I'm feeling like we're so past built out of any capacity that would have been sustainable. And it does feel like a Pandora's box situation. And so I feel really pained to even consider anything further. I do recognize the merits. Well, I recognize that, first of all, this proposal as it stands has so much merit to it. And that's not in question. And then there are the sort of hypotheticals of whether it might ease some of the strain on public lands camping, or whether it might ease some of the traffic coming into town from the north by keeping people in the north. And those just feel like total unknowns. It's just a roll of the dice. And I sit here thinking, trying to figure out whether this is going to make things better or this is going to make things worse. And it feels like a really hard thing to predict. So I know in the water conservation argument that the bigger backpack analogy has come up a lot. And Emily, you kind of discussed that in the freeway analogy of just, when you expand capacity, we fill it. And that is my primary concern right now, is that we are so beyond capacity. And I agree with Garish that there's a difference between need and demand. I work in a restaurant in town, and certainly we are turning away as many people as we are serving, but that does not indicate to me that we should be developing more capacity. So I say this kind of not even knowing how I want to vote in this particular project, because it also seems supremely awful to have to reject a project that has merit after so many monstrosities have managed to sneak in before the moratorium. And I would happily trade any of the hotels that have gone up on the northern side of town for Reed's project in a heartbeat. And that unfortunately is not the reality that we live in. So I think that's really all I can say at this point, is that I feel very, very conflicted.
So I know that the applicant has put some comments in the chat, and I, in a moment, would love to invite the applicant to just address some of these questions to the extent that they're able to provide, an accurate picture. But I have just a couple comments. So related to the applicant's comment in the chat, which is that zoning only allows for two houses. Abby, maybe you can just clarify for the employee housing aspect of that, is that what is the requirements of that against the underlying density? Does the density affect, would we need an amendment potentially to increase the density to allow for some deed restricted employee housing no? Okay.
Yeah, the employee housing is one of the requirements of both our assured housing ordinance and the overnight accommodations overlay. So the employee housing is one of the stipulations of the overall OAO overlay requirements. And so there's nothing additional that needs to be done to approve those 5 units.
And I didn't look for this when I was reviewing the master plan. Are there additional residential? There are 2 residential houses on the north. Are those new build outs? Or are those there? Those are new? Okay. So I'd like to make a motion, and then I have just one additional comment. I move to amend the original motion to, sorry, let me clarify with staff that I can do this before I do this. I'd like to deed restrict those residents as well. Can we amend the master plan? Can we recommend amendment to the master plan with that as a requirement for adoption if the county commission so chooses?
Isn't the OAO, we already require that?
Well, the OAO requires that of the employee housing.
Oh, but you're talking about
units.
the regular house.
Those 2, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question right now. I'd have to run that by the county attorney.
Okay.
But
Well, I can include that in just a staff recommendation to look into that, I guess, and okay. And I see that, again, Reed, I see you with your hand. Just one additional comment, because Garish, I completely see your point as far as need versus demand. And again, I sat with that. I thought about this one a lot this weekend. Given the fact that this is a local developer, given the inconvenience of its location, this is an opportunity to create at least 5 new jobs, assuming 5 houses, 5 jobs, and provide housing for those people. And there's a high likelihood that those jobs would be filled locally because of the developer's relationship to the community. That's not a guarantee. But the difference between a project like this and the project that's across the street that is more of a destination project, that is more likely to attract growth, a higher paying clientele, and even to attract people who might want to work there because of the sort of exclusivity of the experience. We've seen projects similar to this, more sort of, down country type development. And it's just a different, it's a different feel. And I think that would be less of a risk. Again, all perception, all projection, but I think there's enough sort of analog evidence to make me feel comfortable with that hypothesis. And if we have the opportunity to put 5 workers in Grand County in homes that they don't have to work 3 jobs in a restaurant because they have a home and the home is at their workplace, I feel good about that. And there is no such thing as a perfect solution right now. We are far past perfect solutions in this community. There are parts about this that make me feel really uncomfortable. I feel really uncomfortable about having just given a negative recommendation on a housing development in the same area while sitting here suggesting this. Like, I will own that. But 5 houses for 5 residents of Grand County, that to me is a very positive outcome of this. It's not perfect, but I do think that there's a distinction there, and development that's likely to attract, to create less opportunities for locals, I guess. So again, this is all very sensitive, but that's sort of my take. Garish, I know you have your hand raised. I'd love to let you speak. And then Garish, after you speak, then we'll ask the applicant if he'd like to make some comments, just clarifying some of the questions that have come up.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to your comment about we're going to have five houses for employee, or 5 houses for residents, 5 houses for employees, or whatever. We have more employees who have substandard housing in Moab now, or, you know, we've got people that are living in single wide trailers and there's 2 families and, you know, it's and a bunch of kids. It's great that the OIO requires employee housing for this type of development. And maybe Reed would have potentially done that anyway, but I see it as that as a wash too. You know, you create a need for more jobs because you're going to create a business, and even though you're going to provide housing for all or some of your employees, I don't see that as a rationale for thinking that, okay, that makes this project good. It's a good project on its own, but the location is bad because we're so overrun with tourists as it is. That's my whole point.
Reed, I would love to invite you to respond to any questions that have come up. At this point, I think I will ask you to not sort of project anything new to the conversation unless you feel that it clarifies a question that has come up. And, you know, ample opportunity as well to sort of expand your argument and your case and what you see as the reason for this to the county commission, regardless of the outcome here. But if you'd like to make any clarifications to the record, you're welcome to do so. Oh, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Yeah, I just was going to mention the comments that I put in chat. So last year's proposal was a lot different, and that's where I think Josie got confused. So I am doing 3.2 acres of open space as well as the mixed use component on the property. So I'm doing both of those, which meets, you know, kind of what was asked for me of the county commission last year. And as far as the housing goes, to actually clarify, Abby, it is not a requirement to do assured housing for a campground. And so my 5 employee housing is the assured housing requirement that I'm voluntarily doing. And I don't charge rent for any of my employees that work for me. And so that is free housing being provided to my employees on top of wages. And so it is a good opportunity for anybody of any, you know, spot in life to get a job and get on their feet, because I don't charge them for utilities. I don't charge them for housing. I don't charge them rent. I don't charge them for anything. And so the assured housing requirement was something I voluntarily did because it's a need for the development. And then the 2 houses are part of the mixed use component, which is allowed by the zoning in addition to the overnight accommodations.
Thank you very much for clarifying that, Reed. I apologize for giving the wrong information earlier. Yeah, I'm glad you had an opportunity to clarify because Reed is correct in his statement.
Are there any additional discussion items or questions of clarification? Otherwise, I will call the question. Okay. So the motion on the table by OB and seconded by Rick is to send a favorable recommendation to apply the overnight accommodations overlay RV campground to Grand County parcel numbered as stated in the packet, located at 13733 North Highway 191. All in favor of this motion, raise your hand or say aye. 1, 2, 3. All opposed? 1, 2. Okay, Josie, are you choosing to abstain or are you undecided?
I am choosing to abstain.
Okay, so we have 2 abstentions. 3-2. I can't remember exactly how this gets framed to the county commission, but I trust we need 4 to have a motion passed. So that motion fails for lack of a majority vote in favor, which is different from being a negative recommendation. So I think staff has the information they need to give information to the county commission.
Yeah,
Abby?
yes, I will make sure to provide that explanation when presenting it to the county commission with all of the other kind of context and comments that have come up in this discussion.
Okay, and I would also ask you to mention or understand from the county attorney the option of looking into deed restriction as part of this. So, you know, Tricia, you be interested in bringing that back to the county commission.
Yeah, I will look into that and present it as a potential condition when it goes to county commission.
Would you do me a favor, and I'll consider this a future considerations, but just one way or another, let us know, because just more on the procedural stuff. We haven't had a lot of these public hearings back to back to back like this in a while, and I guess I'm just a little rusty. So thank you. Okay, it is 7:08. We've been at this for 3 hours. Does anybody need a 3-minute break, or can we continue to our next public hearing? 3-minute break? Okay, so we will meet back at 7:12 and call back into order. And Reed, thank you for joining us. You're welcome to stay or go. It's your choice. Okay, it's 7:12. I see Garish is back, Steve is back, Makeda, Josie. So we're waiting on OB. There's OB and Rick. You with us? Okay, we'll just give Rick one more moment before we call back in. Rick, are you there? Okay, well, with 6 of us returned, I am going to go ahead and call us back to order at 7:12. I'm sure Rick will join us in just a moment. And this takes us to our 3rd public hearing of the evening. Reach it in my packet. This is a public hearing to solicit oral and written comment on the Dalton Bird commercial rezone application. The parcel is currently zoned highway commercial in the front, approximately 2 acres of the parcel, and rural residential in the back, approximately 2.87 acres. This application is to rezone the rural residential portion of the parcel. Abby, do we have a representative from the applicant here?
It might be the Knudsen home. I'm not seeing. There's a couple of people in the chat. If anyone is a representative of this project, please speak up so we can make sure to keep you in the loop on this. And the applicant representative did come to do the noticing and so is aware that this is happening, but is,
I can email them both.
yeah. So they just may be choosing not to be here.
Choose not to.
Yeah.
It looked like the Knudsen home did briefly turn off mute. Are you here to comment or are you representing the applicant? Or are you the applicant?
So we're not representing the applicant. No, we're just here to comment.
All right, perfect. Okay, well, Abby, I'll turn it over to you for the staff report.
Okay, so this is a proposal to rezone approximately 2.87 acres of rural residential zone property from a parcel that has highway commercial on approximately 2 acres in the front and rural residential on that 2.87. Those are approximate, but in the back. So this rezone application is to rezone the entire parcel to be highway commercial. I refrained from giving a specific staff recommendation on this project because this is a somewhat common rezone request in the county. There have been there have been parcels that have applied for a rezone and been granted an entire rezone to highway commercial. There have been parcels that have applied for a rezone, an entire highway commercial rezone and been denied. And then there are parcels that are currently split zone that are operating within the requirements of both of their zones. The property like this could potentially have commercial activity in the front on the part that is highway commercial and residential activity in the back that's zoned rural residential. Some parcels have done that. There hasn't been issues for consideration for this particular project. I think its proximity to town and the proximity to the USU campus should help inform this decision. This parcel specifically is within half a mile of, I think I include this in the staff report, but within half a mile of this parcel, you have multifamily residential, you have large lot residential, you have small lot residential, you have rural residential, there's even like a tiny sliver of general business, there's highway commercial. So this is a truly mixed use area. The address of this parcel is on Arnell Lane, but it has, I feel like that's somewhat not exactly misleading, but this property has frontage on Highway 191, the highway commercial part. So staff could really see compelling reasons to approve a complete rezone. We don't have a lot of, when we are focusing on economic diversity and encouraging more economic activity, providing the rezone that's asked for would give more commercial land that economic activity could take place on. It does also, the properties that it does back up to on Arnell Lane, that has a much more, those are rural residential properties, they're 1 acre lots, it has a more residential feel. But again, it's in an area that has a lot of types of zones. So those are all issues to consider when looking at this specific parcel. Yeah, any questions before I appreciate the patience of the people who have wanted to participate in this public hearing for sticking around. So yeah, Garish.
Abby, what is the development adjacent to the north, east, and west of this parcel? Are those lots built out as residential now? Or are they open space? I'm trying to get a feel for what kind of impact this would have on existing neighbors if it would develop this.
The lots kind of behind it. They are all residential, 1 acre rural residential lots. Each one does have one house on it. So yeah, but behind this lot, it's definitely residential. But if you go a little on the other side of there's kind of a line of rural residential lots, and on the other side of that you see highway commercial on the side of Mill Creek Drive, and you see multifamily residential in the Sage Valley Circle development back there. So there is definitely kind of a sliver of rural residential behind this parcel that is surrounded on other sides by more dense uses, highway commercial and multifamily residential, and the boundary to Moab City is very close as well.
Abby, I have a question,
Yeah.
or maybe a comment. I feel like it's Groundhog's Day. Didn't this just go? I thought this just went in front of the.
Across the street.
Yeah, across the street.
It was a Dalton, but it was across the street.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And that was approved as a
Right.
zone to
Okay,
full highway
sorry.
commercial.
I'm like, why do I feel?
It's not just you. I mean, this is a lot. When the highway commercial zone was initially created, it was created as a buffer from the middle of Highway 191, and in doing so created split lots just all along. And so, and so like I said earlier, a lot of those lots, such as that one that came up recently and is across the street, have applied to have the highway commercial extended to fill out the rest of their lot.
Quite a few of them have done that.
There's quite a few that have done that. So,
And isn't this going adjacent to them to the south? Is that going to be a motel?
yeah, adjacent to the south is a property that is going to be developed as a motel, and the motel, for whatever reason, has decided to keep that split zone so that all the commercial activity is happening in the highway commercial part of that lot. And there is a small kind of sliver of rural residential behind there that, let me see, actually, maybe I can share my screen. This was included in the packet, but I feel like since we're talking about it, it will be helpful just to look at. So, all right, so can everybody see that? So the parcel that we're looking at, the parcel in question is this one right here. The little dialogue box blocks it every time, but we can see, it's this parcel right here. So this one directly to the south has a much the north.
I said south.
I'm all turned around. Has a much smaller amount of rural residential, but that split lot is maintained. And you can see across the street where the highway commercial zone has been extended to the boundaries of the lot. And, you can see on this map too, it really gives you the picture of how many different types of zones and uses are in this area. So I think it would be fully appropriate for this rezone to be granted. But I'm leaving, that up to the discretion of Planning Commission and County Commission.
Do we have any idea what they want to do with it or no?
No, but that's not necessary at all for a rezone. In fact, it kind of makes the decision easier because what a rezone, the considerations for a rezone are just the rezone. You're granting whatever uses are allowed in highway commercial on that parcel. And so the applicant doesn't have they have not shared any specific plans with me, but that should not affect the ability to make the decision on this rezone. All right. I'm going to stop sharing the screen because I think everyone's gotten a sense, but any more questions for staff right now?
Okay, we'll give the applicant one more opportunity if they're here or listening on YouTube to come off of mute and make any comments you'd like to make around your application. It does not appear that the applicant is here or, oh.
Sorry, just a sec. In the chat, Lisa C said Matt is here with me. Matt would like the opportunity to speak at the public hearing. Is Matt the applicant or just another person that would like to speak in the public hearing? That's a neighbor IT guy. Oh, okay.
No,
Oh my gosh, okay, sorry.
No, this is Matt Sunster, IT guy.
Sorry, yeah, Mary just pointed that out.
And I'd love to speak on it if we're waiting for
Lindsay first. Okay, yeah, we'll definitely let you speak as soon as the public hearing is open. Sorry about that. So,
yeah, Lindsay.
So the three people who have said they'd like to speak, so Lindsay noted at the beginning, then Knutson Home said that they would like to speak, and then Matt and Lisa. If Lisa also would like to make a comment, you're both welcome to do so. If there's no additional questions for staff on the staff report, and since the applicant is not here, it's 7:23 and I will open this public hearing. So in that order, Lindsay, Knutson Home, I'm so sorry, I didn't catch your names, and Matt and Lisa. And then if anybody else would like to make a comment, please just post in the chat that you'd like to make a comment and we'll make sure to get to your comment during this public hearing. So Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind just stating your name into the record, and then you're welcome to give your comments. Oh, Lindsay, we're not able to hear you.
Also, Emily, will you officially open the public hearing?
I did.
Oh, you did. Okay.
No, yeah, that was at 7:23. All good. And we're still unable to hear you. Is that you who just called in? The 719 number? Oh, Abby, what do they have to press to unmute on their phone?
*6. I think if you do *6 on the phone, it should unmute it. Oh, do it one more time. I think you accidentally unmuted and remuted. Testing, say something.
I can't hear you, Lindsay. I can see you talking. I can't hear you.
Lindsay, tell you what, I'm gonna move us on, but I'm gonna come back to you. You might want to try just logging off and re-logging back on. That sometimes works. Age of technology that it is. Okay, Knutson Home. I think you were up next.
Okay, we live.
Could you state your name into the record for us, please?
My name is David Knutson, and my wife is Mary Knutson. She's here with me. We own property adjacent that is zoned commercial, and we also live in the area. And we don't have any problems or difficulties. We support the rezone.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Did your wife want to make a comment individually as well, or is that?
Yeah, I'll do it. Just for the record, as more support. We live just down over the hill, not very far. We don't have a problem with this rezone. I think it is appropriate.
Okay, thank you. And I think Lindsay's still trying on the phone, which is fine. So Matt, are you and Lisa speaking separately as well, or is it just you?
Hey, hello. It kind of depends. I mean, if it counts as two, then yeah, we speak.
You're both willing. You're both able to make your own comment. I'll just ask that you both read your name into the record. Yep.
My name is Matt Sanaceros. I own property just on the side of the highway.
My name's Lisa Sanaceros. I'm a property owner as well.
So I'll say that we're going to do two statements because apparently we're slicing hairs here. So, you know, we live on the other side, and we just went through this, just as what Tricia was just saying, is that we had our half of the split zone next to us rezoned just recently, and we complained about it then. But at the same time, I can appreciate that a landowner wants to do and should be able to do what they want to do with their property. But this is a split rezone, and the amount that you're talking about here will easily support a number of homes. And within the zoning, even within rural residential, the same comment I had before was, why are we chipping away at it? We're talking about housing crisis. We're talking about needing places for people to live. And now you're talking about slicing that out. And where do you stop? I get that it was a buffer zone on the highway all the way. And these split zones, we could do this all day long. So now I've got a piece of property next to me that's highway commercial. I hope something funny doesn't happen there. But I've also got the college happening right on the hill right next to us. And that's happening right across the street from where this piece of property is. And it also abuts right up to Lindsay. Lindsay lives right there on Arnell Lane. If you can't hear her problem is that all of a sudden you open up a huge lane of travel right in front of her house. But that's going to happen with rural residential one way or the other. You need to be able to have places for people to live. And you keep chipping away and you keep holding it on the back of rural residential. Where does it stop? Leave it as it is. I mean, you're talking about 2.4 acres, right? Does that sound right? Sorry, ladies, I forget what the number is. 2.4, 2.7.
Okay, is about like 2.8 or
2.8, almost 3.8, almost 3 acres. And that's a decent part of town. And you know, yeah, it's going to get developed out here. And I hope some nice things happen here, but you need to stop scraping away at rural residential. You need to stop scraping away at the housing force and the people who are backing you up and supporting this entire community. And I'm tired of it. And it happened right next to me. And I spoke up at the planning commission, and then the council changed, and the county council decided to go for it and said, you know what, that's fine. So, you know, what's funny is I have a little piece of like probably a 12-foot triangle of highway commercial now on my property. So what does that do? Like, should I apply for highway commercial? No. Come on, take care of your residents. I don't know what else I can say. Kay and Judy they live right here too. They live right above us. I'm sure they say the same exact thing as I do.
I know for a fact they do.
Is that I don't want a big high-rise, you know, condo thing, but there's a hotel going in right across the street, right on the end of my drive, just on the north side of the highway right there, right where Knutson's yard is. There's a hotel going in right there. A hotel.
Thank you for your comments.
Well, you're very welcome. I'd be happy to answer any questions. If I live right here, I see it every day. I mean, I know exactly the piece of property you're talking about. But I would love Lindsay to speak her piece too, because she lives right on the other side of that. She backs up to that. I mean, her kids play out there. I still can't hear you, Lindsay.
Lindsay, so first of all, Matt.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. I want to make sure we get everyone's comments.
Matt, it sounded like you reached a natural conclusion, but I just want to make sure I didn't cut you off. And
no, I think I'm good. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for your
I am opposed to this, and Lisa is opposed to this.
Yes, I am.
And Kay and Judy Tangreen, who are not here right now, are opposed to this as well. And Kevin Tangreen and Kimberly, Blackburn are probably opposed to this as well.
All right.
I couldn't
Well-
speak for all of them, but
We can
Well-
speak for Kay and Judy.
I can speak for myself. I can speak for my wife.
Perfect.
She can speak
Thank-
for herself.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Love
All
you.
right. Lindsay?
Hi. Sorry about the confusion there. I'm Lindsay Copeland. I live on Arnell Lane. This whole area was just zoned absolutely crazy. I mean, we have split parcels through the whole thing, and it feels like every year we're fighting a rezone. Yes, this has highway commercial on it, but it also has close to three lots that could be residential. I would fully support rezoning the residential to higher density even. I'm not a not in my backyard person, but why in this current housing climate, not even just in Moab, in the whole state where there's just not enough houses, would we strip away any possibility to build residential units? It's crazy to me. I would love to get a little bit bigger house in town, and I can't because there's just not an availability of houses here that aren't sold to people that come and visit every 2 weeks or aren't sold to overnight accommodations. We're not taking care of the community. And the tourist economy is great. It pays a lot of people's bills. But you know what? If there's not people to work at City Market and there's not people to work at the school to teach everybody's kids that work in housekeeping or work in the restaurant industry, we don't have a community and we can't support the tourism as it is. We need to make a stand to allow us to have places to live. We still are a community. When is enough enough? I mean, do we really need to rezone this to build more condos for rich people when we could potentially rezone it to build more homes in a neighborhood? This is a great place to live. We're close enough to town that you could walk or bike very easily, but we're also far enough that on Jeep Safari, we can hide. I know that, we're close to the highway, but it's not loud here like when I lived on Hobbs. We have a buffer from that. I know that there's a hotel going on Knutson's property. I mean, do we need this to be another hotel, for heaven's sakes? Do we not have enough of them? You can't throw a rock without hitting some hotel that blocks out our entire view of the rim, which is why a lot of us live here. My other concern is there is a ridiculously zoned lot across the street from me that wants to put in overnight rentals. And I'm concerned that if we rezone this lot, they'll shoot back in for overnight rentals there too. And Arnell Lane, the way it's set up, cannot support that. I just think we need to quit rezoning anything residential into commercial. If it's residential, keep it residential. We need residential areas for our community members at this point. I think that's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments and persistence in the phone. Is there anybody else who'd like to make a comment who hasn't done so already? All right.
May I make another comment, please? This is Mary Knutson.
Go ahead, Mary.
Yes. Well, so I just want to say that I'm Lindsay's neighbor. I live 2 houses down, so I know what she's talking about. I really would not support this zone change if it meant that Arnold Lane was going to go all the way through up to that property, but it really can't happen because of the way the property lots are lined out. But I know that my husband and I tried to break off a piece of our property a few years ago for our kids to build a home on. County wouldn't allow it. Jim Nyland lives right across the street. He's tried to break off a little piece for another home to be built on his property, and the county won't allow it. So what makes everybody think that the county's going to allow 3 more homes to be built up there in a little, to subdivide it? The county isn't allowing this to happen, and because we've tried, and they have tried.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else who'd like to comment during this public hearing? Okay. Seeing none, I will close this public hearing at 7:37. Is there?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Emily. My wife just,
I couldn't type. fast
she
enough.
couldn't
Okay.
type fast enough.
I will reopen the public hearing and
It was, but barely at the end there, she just said that I would like to see rezoning to allow for more housing, like for the Knutsons and the Nylons, like SLR,
Small lot
like
residential.
small lot rural residential. And I don't have a problem either about increasing density, like Lindsay had mentioned either. But, you know, I have a concern a bit about Arnell Lane going all the way through, which honestly would move JD's Nylon's trailer and the property he's on in order to be able to connect it correctly up to the road. But that's not out of the question. I mean, you're talking about changing, you know, a future property into a highway area that currently could be very well used as rural residential the way that it is a dead end street.
Thank you,
Anyway,
Matt, for
thank
your
you.
comments.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. And Lisa, thank you for your comment. We have it in the record as it was written in the
I
chat.
appreciate that. Thank you. You can also include my comments that I just spoke. Have a
Great.
good night.
Thank you so much. All right, seeing no additional requests to speak, I will close this public hearing. Is there any discussion from the Planning Commission? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion. Garish?
We've had these splits before, and I think there's a couple. There's a request to make all property rural residential and get rid of the highway commercial, or they could subdivide along the zone change, which would allow more housing to be built. We have a critical need for housing. We have no critical need for more hotels. We have no critical need for any other types of overnight accommodations. We have a need for is housing. It gets built in residential areas. And I would hate to see any more of our zoned residential land go to commercial uses. That's it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting with this split zoning issue, and it has come up over and over again, but I think, I believe it was one of the commenters who made the comment that, or maybe it was Abby, when the highway commercial area was created, it was created as a buffer from the highway. I think that makes sense. The fact that they didn't extend it down the lot size shows that those planners at the time did not intend for rural residential, for highway commercial to go deeper into the valley, but for it to stay near to highway commercial. I think that's a just interesting way to consider the intent retroactively. OB?
Yeah, I was going to say, I probably agree with Garish on this. The other thing is probably when I'm more favorable is when it's 0.28 acres. That is in another zone besides highway commercial, and you've got 4 or 5 acres that's highway commercial. Then it may make more sense, but this is a fairly large piece of residential area, so it makes me less likely to be in favor of this.
Do you want to get a motion on the table then, if there's no additional questions for staff?
I just very quickly want to say, I know the issue of using this parcel for hotels or overnight accommodations has come up, and I just want to clarify before a motion and vote that any parcel in the county can apply to have the overnight accommodation overlay applied to it, and any overnight rental use is not a by right use in highway commercial. Just clarifying that for commenters and for anyone watching on YouTube.
Thank you, Abby. So before we talk any more about the merits, if there's no questions for staff? And the applicant isn't here. Let's,
I do.
Steve?
One quick question. Are there any easements to that for Abby and or Mary? I just look at the map and I don't see any easements, so I can discuss later, but are there currently any easements to the back of that property from either Arnell or Mill Creek? It just doesn't look like it on a map.
Now, if they want, if they have to build a road, I mean, if they need to access that back parcel as a residential zone district, it's gonna have to come through that commercial property. Because our now stops, it doesn't reach this property at all.
Yeah, I asked that question because I don't know if we're sacrificing the potential for homes because there's no easement. You could buy a property there, but you'd have to get airdropped into it, I think.
Well, if the property owner were to do a future subdivision where they were subdividing off that residential part of that process would be providing a dedicated road that would access that parcel. So again, I don't want to go too theoretical into things that are not on the table, but Arnell does not access the back rural part of that property, and were it to be developed, there would need to be access developed through the commercial to reach those rural residential part of the parcel. So that was a very good question.
okay. Any additional questions for staff? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
Sure, I move to send an unfavorable recommendation to the county commission for the rezone of approximately 2.87 acres from rural residential to highway commercial located at 1431 Arnell Lane, parcel number 02007, I guess 3 zeros and 7, and -0003.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Garrett, with Josie quick behind. So Obi, Garrett, Josie for any comment, and then we'll move on to the rest of the body.
Yes, I guess I'm persuaded by many arguments, probably. Of course, it was of probably benefit to people that you did this 300-foot buffer along through properties and made it highway commercial. Here we're in a situation where about half of the land, I believe, is highway commercial and half is rural residential. And as I said before, if it was just a small fraction, maybe I'd be more compelled to change this into highway commercial. I agree with Garish that there is a need for residential property, and I think there are things folks could do. Maybe we would look more favorably on an a zoning change to small lot residential or some other form that would give us more housing. So I'm not in favor of this rezone.
Garish, do you have anything to add?
I know, but I just want to say I thought that the system and Ms. Copeland did a really good job of explaining some of the impacts that they can see. And I think we need to listen to neighbors in neighborhood what will happen of their property if we allow zone change.
Josie, did you want to make any comments? And if
I mean, I think it's mostly been said, and on top of that, I don't see an immediately compelling reason to change it to highway commercial, and then it just compounds it further that people who live in the neighborhood could be adversely affected, and I take that very seriously. And I kind of agree in this kind of split zoning messiness of that corridor, it would make more sense to maybe apply for a rezone to like a higher density housing, to have that be the buffer that eases into rural residential. That makes a little more sense to me, rather than immediately having people who have rural residential properties suddenly find themselves adjacent to commercial property, whereas someone on this property is already, adjacent to commercial property, if that makes sense. So Yeah, I just see no compelling reason to rezone it to commercial.
Yeah, I agree with you. This one's easy for me. Places where you could build housing isn't where we should be putting commercial land. If we can build housing, if it's in a residential area, it should be used for residential uses. I would support multi-family or single lot, or excuse me, small lot, but yeah, residential land shouldn't be commercial land right now. So I think this one's on principle for me. That's my piece. Steve, Maketa, Rick, anything to add? Otherwise, we'll call the question.
I second everything that's already been said. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
I want to state this is actually a hard decision for me, based on, I think the big component of my platform for why I got appointed to this body was economic diversification, and making that a little bit of a larger, 2.8 acres larger highway commercial on something that's already contiguous. I think it fits. It's not spotted, spot zoning. I think it makes sense to a degree, but I also do hear it will affect folks in that neighborhood. I just wonder with no access to it, no easements, if this landowner decides to do nothing and sit on it, or just use that front little strip of commercial because they can still find something viable in whatever that is, maybe an acre or so, maybe even a little larger, they block that out. And while that's certainly favorable for a buffer for those residents, it doesn't create any more housing. So, it's still maybe it could be used way down the line, but I don't see it as we're trading this for that. It's a little more ambiguous than that. So that's why that's difficult for me.
I'm kind of in the same place with Steve. If Jim Nyland doesn't want to do anything, that R&L lane won't go through. So yeah, you got a house back there. It's already landlocked behind that. So I can see both sides. It's a hard one. So.
Okay, Garish, last word, and then we'll call the question.
So with the price of land in this part of Grand County, I can't see a developer who would sit on, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 worth of property just because they didn't get it rezoned into highway commercial. If it were to be developed, they would have to provide through the strip to get to it. So the fact that there aren't existing easements, to me, Steve, I'm sorry, but I just don't agree with you. And I can follow your logic about diversity. Maybe they'll paint, I don't know, but the fact that this could be considered landlocked, if they ever decide to sell it, eventually there will be access provided for it.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, then I will call the question. All right, we have a motion on the table by OB, seconded by Garish, to send an unfavorable recommendation to the County Commission for the rezone of approximately 2.87 acres from rural residential to highway commercial located at 1431 Arnell Lane. All in favor of this motion, raise your hand or say aye. Garish, Emily, Josie, OB, and Maketa, all opposed? None opposed, all abstaining? Rick and Steve, are you abstaining or are you opposed?
I'm going to oppose, actually.
Okay,
Sorry
so
to
we
clear.
have, no, you're fine. We have 1 in opposition, 1 abstention, and 5 in favor of this motion. So the motion passes. Okay, thank you, everyone. We have not chosen to untable the survey since we moved that up. And OB, I am going to recommend with our late hour that we continue the process to our next meeting assuming no one else has a motion to the contrary.
Go home and nurse a baby.
Yeah, I think that.
Yeah. Any future considerations?
Very quick, the assured housing as it's written in the land use code is in need of some tweaks and updates to make it more applicable. And the building department and I are working on that, and you should see a draft of that at some, potentially the next meeting or the meeting after that. That's my only future considerations. Anything else from planning commissioners to put on that list, or from Trisha, or? Okay, and anyone can always email me if there are specific things you'd like to see discussed at planning commission meetings, and we can find a way to work that in. So that's everything from me.
All right, with no future considerations, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Josie to adjourn, a second. Seconded by Makeda, all in favor? Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.